Yo, welcome to Omni Wizard. Got an absolute banger for you today. What if Harry Potter met with Superman and became disciple of Man of Steel? Like, subscribe, comment below. Let's go. Chapter 1. The sky breaks open. The Highlands smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Harry walked with his hands in his jacket pockets, boots crunching over wet heather, the kind of silence around him that had weight, not peaceful silence. The other kind, the kind that sits on your chest and reminds you that the noise you're used to is gone, and you're not sure if you miss it or if you're just lost without it. It had been 4 months since the Battle of Hogwarts. 4 months since Voldemort's body hit the floor of the Great Hall, and the cheering started, and everyone turned to Harry with those eyes, those wet, grateful, overwhelming eyes, and Harry had smiled back because what else do? You smile, you hug people, you let them cry on your shoulder, you tell them it's over. He'd said it's over so many times in those first weeks that the words had stopped meaning anything. They were just sounds his mouth made to fill the space where something real should have been. He wasn't at Hogwarts, he wasn't at the Burrow, he wasn't at Grimmauld Place, which still smelled like Sirius no matter how many times Creature cleaned it. He was here 3 miles north of a village called Kinlochew that barely had a post office, in the middle of nowhere, Scotland, because nowhere was the only place that didn't ask anything of him. Hermione had called it a coping mechanism. Ron had called it going a bit mental, mate, but fair enough. Ginny had kissed him on the cheek, pressed a wrapped sandwich into his hands, and told him to come back when he was ready. He loved her more for that than for almost anything else. He pulled his wand out of habit, spun it once between his fingers and put it back. Old reflex. Check the perimeter. Check for threats. Check. There was nothing to check. That was the whole problem. The sky above the Highlands was the specific shade of gray that made you feel like the clouds were thinking about something and hadn't reached a conclusion. Harry tilted his head back and watched them move, heavy and slow, rolling in from the northwest. A storm coming. Not tonight maybe, but soon. He found the flat rock he'd been using as a thinking spot for the past week. A wide shelf of gray stone jutting out over a drop that fell away into a valley so green it almost hurt, and sat down on the edge of it, legs dangling. Below him, a river caught what little light there was and threw it back crooked. He ate the last of the oatcakes he'd bought from the village shop, drank cold tea from a flask, and watched the light change. He thought about Fred. He did that a lot. He thought about Remus and Tonks, who'd had a baby and then died for it. He thought about Colin Creevey, who'd snuck back into the castle because he'd wanted to fight, because he'd believed in something, and who'd never gotten old enough to feel disillusioned about it. He thought about Dumbledore, and the way the old man had kept things from him, and whether it had been love or strategy or both, and whether there was even a difference when you were playing a game that long. He thought about the Elder Wand, now back in Dumbledore's tomb, and the invisibility cloak folded in his pack, and the resurrection stone somewhere on the floor of the Forbidden Forest. 3 objects of legend. He did all 3 and he'd chosen to give them back to the world, which was supposed to feel noble. Mostly it just felt like putting down something heavy. He was 17 years old and he felt like he was 100. The first sign was the birds. Every bird in the valley below flushed upward at once, not in the staggered way they do when a predator moves through undergrowth, but all at once, as if the ground itself had made a sound too low for human ears. Hundreds of them, starlings and pipits and something larger that Harry couldn't name, spiraling up in a dark, panicked cloud. Harry was on his feet before he'd decided to stand. He scanned the horizon. Nothing. The valley, the river, the hill on the opposite side, maybe 2 miles off. The sky cracked. Not thunder, not lightning. Something tore through the cloud cover like a fist through paper, trailing white and orange behind it, screaming down at an angle that Harry's brain tried to process and couldn't quite file correctly. Too fast to be a plane. Too controlled to be a meteor, or at least, it was until it wasn't, because then the object, thing, vehicle, whatever it was, seemed to fight its own trajectory, seemed to correct, and the trail of fire bent in a way that fire wasn't supposed to bend, and for half a second Harry thought he was watching something alive try to keep itself from dying. It lost the fight. The impact hit the far hill like a hammer. The sound came a beat later, a concussive boom that rolled across the valley and physically moved Harry's hair. The ground under his feet shivered. A column of smoke and earth shot up, orange at the base, black at the top, and the birds that had just settled back down launched themselves skyward again in a second wave of pure animal terror. Harry stared at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then he ran. He apparated 3 times to close the distance. Each jump a blind crack through space, instinct over precision, and came out the 3rd time on scorched heather, 20 meters from the crater's edge, coughing on smoke that tasted like burning metal and something else beneath it. something that didn't have a name but made the hair on the back of his neck stand up in a way that had nothing to do with magic, and everything to do with the very old animal part of his brain that understood wrong without needing words. The crater was about 30 feet across, shallow relative to the speed of impact, which was strange. Whatever had hit had slowed down considerably in those last seconds. The heather at the rim was still smoldering. Inside the depression, half buried in torn earth, was a pod. That was the only word for it, a pod, shaped vaguely like a teardrop lying on its side, roughly 12 feet long, made of something that wasn't quite metal. The surface had an almost organic quality to it, panels that overlapped like scales, and along its spine ran a series of markings that Harry recognized were not any human alphabet. They were almost like runes, but not quite. The geometry was wrong, too precise, the angles too intentional. He walked to the rim and looked down. One end of the pod had cracked open on impact, not shattered, but split along what looked like a seam, like an egg that had been squeezed too hard. Through the gap, Harry could see the dull glow of something still powered inside, blue-white light pulsing, and he could see a hand, an arm actually, extended through the gap, palm up, completely still, fingers slightly curled. The arm was dressed in something dark, with a stylized symbol on the sleeve that Harry couldn't make out from this angle. He slid down into the crater without thinking about whether that was sensible. Up close, the pod's surface radiated heat, not scalding, but significant. Whatever had powered this thing had been running hot. Harry crouched next to the split seam and looked inside and found himself looking at a man. A very large man, as it happened, well over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested whoever had made his clothes had given up trying to find anything off the rack. Dark hair, slightly overlong, a jaw that could have been used to split firewood. He was alive. Harry could see his chest rising and falling, but unconscious, slumped in a seat that had partially broken free of the floor, one arm thrown out through the gap, the other still buckled across his chest by something that looked like a harness. He was wearing what Harry could only describe as a suit, dark blue, almost black in the low light, with a red and yellow symbol on the chest, a stylized letter S, or possibly not a letter at all, something that only looked like one, the same way a foreign alphabet might accidentally spell something familiar. Harry looked at the symbol. He looked at the man. He looked at the smoking crater around them, and the pod from space, and the hand that had bent its own trajectory in the last seconds of a fall that should have killed anything made of flesh and bone. "Right," Harry said aloud to no one. "Okay." He tried a Lohomora on the seam first. Nothing. He tried a more aggressive unlocking charm, the one Bill Weasley had once shown him that was technically used for curse-sealed vaults. The pod made a sound like a tuning fork being struck, a resonant hum that vibrated in Harry's back teeth and then went still. No luck. He tried Reducto on the damaged seam, targeting the cracked section rather than the intact material. That worked, in the sense that the seam buckled outward another 6 inches, which was enough. Harry squeezed through sideways, which was undignified, and found himself in the interior of the pod. It was cramped and smelled strongly of ozone, and something sweet metallic he had no reference for. The blue-white light came from a central column that ran along the pod's axis, still faintly glowing, populated with those same non-rune markings in illuminated lines. A control surface of some kind, though nothing Harry recognized as buttons or levers. The man was buckled into the single seat by 2 crossed bands of something that wasn't metal but wasn't fabric. It had the give of leather and the dull sheen of ceramic. Harry's unlocking charms bounced off it like thrown pebbles. He tried Defindo next, angling carefully to avoid the man's chest, and the material cut cleanly. The man immediately slumped forward, and Harry caught him by the shoulders, which was like trying to catch a piece of furniture. The man was just very, very heavy, in a way that didn't quite make sense for his size. Harry got an arm under his shoulders and heaved, and between gravity and leverage and one wordless mobilicorpus, managed to get him out through the gap in the seam and lying on the crater floor. Harry knelt beside him and tried a diagnostic charm, the one Madame Pomfrey used, a sweeping gesture that returned a rough impression of physical state. The feedback he got was strange. There was life there, clearly strong life, almost aggressively so, but the magical sense of it was flat in a way Harry couldn't explain, like trying to hear an echo in a room packed with cotton wool. No magical signature at all, just a person, very intensely, very thoroughly just a person. He sat back on his heels. The man's face was oddly calm for someone who just crashed from orbit. There was no blood, no visible injury. The suit was scorched in places, but the skin showing at his neck and hands was unbroken. Harry looked at the pod, he looked at the suit, he looked at the symbol. And then with the clarity that comes from having fought a dark wizard for 7 years and survived by trusting his gut over his brain, he understood what he was looking at. He'd heard the name. Everyone had, even in the wizarding world, even people who didn't follow Muggle news. You couldn't avoid it. It had been everywhere for the past 2 years. The reports, the footage, the endless argument, the alien, the hero, the impossible man, the one who'd caught a falling plane in Metropolis. The one who'd stopped a nuclear detonation with his bare hands over the Pacific. The one who'd stood between a doomsday-class entity and the city of Gotham and not moved. Superman. Blimey, Harry said. He said it very quietly, in the tone of someone who has reached their absolute limit for surprising things in a single afternoon. The man's eyes opened. They were blue. Startlingly, uncomplicatedly blue, the specific shade of a clear autumn sky, and they focused on Harry with an immediacy that was jarring, not the slow, confused surface of someone coming out of unconsciousness, but something that went from zero to completely present in about half a second. The man sat up, not gradually. He sat up with a speed and smoothness that made Harry's wand hand twitch. They stared at each other from a distance of about 3 feet. "Hi," Harry said, because it was all he had. The man looked at him. He looked at the pod, he looked at the crater. His eyes moved in a way that was slightly unnerving, too fast, too thorough, like they were processing more than Harry's eyes could and filing it away. Then he looked back at Harry. "You pulled me out," he said. His voice was normal, American accent if Harry had to place it. The voice of someone who was holding something very carefully still inside it, which Harry recognized because he did the same thing constantly. "Seemed like the thing to do," Harry said. The man looked at Harry's wand, still in his hand by reflex. He didn't react with alarm. He looked at it with the attention of someone cataloging information. "You used magic," he said, "to open the pod. Is that a problem?" He got to his feet, which took about 1 second, the way standing up takes 1 second for a person who hasn't just fallen from near orbit. He rolled his shoulders carefully, Harry noticed, like someone checking inventory, and looked at the pod with an expression that was almost grief. "I need to pull the memory core before it degrades. The external housing is compromised. I could, not harsh, direct. Thank you, but the material responds badly to most energy fields, including, the briefest hesitation, magic. I've seen it before." He moved past Harry and crouched by the pod, and his hands moved over the surface in a way that was practiced and precise, pressing along the seam of panels until something released with a soft click, and he extracted a small hexagonal object that pulsed once blue and went dark. He stood and pocketed it, and then he turned and looked at Harry properly for the first time. The full weight of that look was, not threatening, but significant. This was someone who looked at things and saw them. "You're a wizard," he said. "Yeah, British, young, post-combat by the way you hold yourself." A pause. "There was a war, recently. Something magical that the non-magical world wasn't fully aware of." Harry blinked. "You know about that. I make it my business to know about things that affect people's safety." He said it plainly, without arrogance, just fact. "I know about the wizarding world. I didn't know about the war until after it ended. By then your people had already handled it." He looked at Harry with that same careful attention. "You look like you were in the middle of it." "I was the middle of it," Harry said. More or less. The man was quiet for a moment, then he extended a hand. "Clark Kent." Harry shook it. His grip was controlled. Harry could feel the exquisite care taken not to crush, like shaking hands with someone who knew exactly how much force they could accidentally apply and was actively choosing not to. "Harry Potter." Something moved across Clark's face at that. Recognition, clearly, the name meant something to him, but he didn't make a production of it. He just nodded once. "What happened to your pod?" Harry asked. Clark looked back at it. The expression was harder to read now. "I was running a transit path over northern Europe. The navigation array picked up an interference pattern about 40 miles above the Scottish coast. Magical in origin, I've never seen one that strong in open atmosphere before. It hit the navigation system and the propulsion array simultaneously. By the time I manually corrected, he stopped. Too late for a clean landing. A magical interference pattern." Harry frowned. "That's not natural." It's not." Clark looked at him with steady eyes. "It's a weapon signature. Someone was using it deliberately. A beat. I don't know who. Yet." The word "yet" carried a very specific weight. Harry recognized it. It was the weight of someone who intended to find out and wasn't going to be moved on the subject. The storm that had been thinking about itself on the horizon made a decision. Rain started to come down, the Highland kind, which didn't bother with a buildup and simply began at full intensity, cold and relentless and sideways. Clark looked up at it with an expression of mild displeasure. Then he looked at Harry. "Is there somewhere we can talk?" Harry looked at the pod. "What about, it'll keep? The material is stable now that the propulsion's offline. I need to eat something before I can deal with any of it. He said this with a very slight, almost embarrassed quality, as if admitting to a mundane physical need was slightly mortifying. The flight depleted more than I expected. Harry almost smiled. He didn't quite, but almost. There's a village, he said. 3 miles south, there's a pub. A pub, Clark repeated. It's Scotland. There's always a pub. The pub was called the Rowan and Red, and it was small and warm and smelled like wood smoke and something frying in a back kitchen. There were 4 other people inside, a pair of farmers at the bar who'd been having the same argument about drainage for what looked like several days, an old woman with a terrier in a corner booth, and a barman who was reading a folded newspaper and had the expression of a man at genuine peace with the universe. Harry and Clark came in from the rain, both soaked, and the barman glanced up, took them in without visible excitement, and said, "What can I get you?" They took a table in the back. Clark ordered everything on the menu that was available as food, which turned out to be a full-cooked breakfast despite it being 4 in the afternoon, a bowl of soup and a ham sandwich, and he ate it all with the focused efficiency of someone fueling a machine, which Harry supposed was more or less accurate. Harry drank tea and watched him. "You crashed because of a weapon," Harry said. "Someone wanted to knock you out of the sky. Someone wanted to test whether they could." Clark looked up from the soup. "There's a difference. If the objective was to kill me, the interference pattern would have been constructed differently. This was designed to disorient and ground." He set the spoon down. "It was a test. Someone wanted to know if their technology worked. And it did, this time." He said it without self-pity, which Harry respected. "I wasn't prepared for the interaction between Kryptonian propulsion and high-intensity magical interference. Now I am. What does the magical side of it tell you?" Harry asked. "About who built it." Clark looked at him. "It tells me that whoever built it understood Kryptonian technology well enough to design something specifically to interact with it. That's not publicly available information. That's someone with access to things they shouldn't have." A pause. "And a wizard or someone working with a wizard, because the interference was generated by something that used magic as its power source. Not mechanical, not electronic, something older." Harry thought about that. He turned his mug around in his hands. "The wizarding world is full of people who'd love to get their hands on alien technology. Half of them are idiots, but some of them are very smart and very angry and think magic makes them above everyone else. Does it, magic?" The question was genuine, not provocative. Harry looked at his hands, the hands that had cast the killing curse and died and come back, the hands that had held the Elder Wand and the invisibility cloak and the stone. "No," he said, "it just makes you different. Different isn't better. It's a different set of tools. You can still be stupid with it. You can still be cruel." Clark nodded slowly. He was looking at Harry with that careful attention again. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I knew your name, some of the context. A boy who'd been used as a weapon against something dark." He was choosing his words with precision, Harry noticed, not carefully the way politicians were careful, but carefully the way doctors were, like the words were instruments. "I expected you to be angrier, louder about it. I spent it," Harry said simply, "the anger. Got through the war and it burned most of it. Now there's just," he stopped, shrugged. "Whatever this is, emptiness." Harry looked at him. "Not depression," Clark said, "not despair, just the thing that comes after sustained crisis, when the emergency is over and your nervous system doesn't know what to do with the absence of it." He spoke from somewhere personal and didn't try to dress it up. "I know what that feels like." "You're Superman," Harry said. "You don't run out of emergencies. But I know what it's like to win something and not know what you are without the fight, a beat. It's a particular kind of lost." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the rain was going strong. One of the farmers at the bar made a point about drainage. The other made a counterpoint. The barman continued to be at peace. "How long have you been up here?" Clark asked. "About 3 weeks. Alone, mostly. I go back sometimes to see people, but then I come back here." Harry turned his mug again. "There's no one up here who wants anything from me." Clark was quiet for a beat. He ate the last of the sandwich and pushed the plate to the side. The interference pattern originated from somewhere in the Carpathian Basin, Romania, approximately, possibly further east. He looked at Harry steadily. "Whatever they were testing, they'll test it again. Something bigger next time. You're going to go after it." "Yes, alone," the word landed between them. Clark held Harry's gaze. There was something in the quality of his silence that was an answer before the words came. "I've seen your file," Clark said. "What there is of one. A young man who defeated a dark wizard the magical world had failed to contain for 20 years, using no Kryptonian technology, no superhuman strength, nothing but what he knew and who he trusted." He paused. "And who then walked into a death he knew was coming willingly because it was the only way through." Harry said nothing. His jaw was tight. What happened after that? Clark asked, not rhetorically. What happens to a person who does that? He came back, Harry said flatly. And then there was a lot of cleaning up, and then everyone cheered for a bit, and now he's in a pub in the middle of nowhere, Scotland. He's bored, Clark said. He's hollow because the purpose is gone, and he's got power that could move mountains and no idea what to do with it now that the obvious target's been removed. Harry said, "Stop reading me." "I'm not reading you." Clark's voice was not gentle exactly, honest. "I'm recognizing you. There's a difference." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "The interference device," he said. "What do you need?" "Information first. Access to someone who understands magical signatures well enough to help me trace the specific frequency. A contact in the wizarding world." He looked at Harry. "And eventually, if this is what I think it is, something large and deliberate aimed at both our worlds, I'll need someone who knows both sides, someone who can work in both. You want me to work with you?" "I want to train you," Clark said. "First," Harry blinked. "Excuse me, I've seen what you can do with magic." "Your instincts are exceptional. Your technique," Clark considered his words. "You fight like someone who survived 7 years of improvisation. You're fast, smart, and completely fearless, but you fight reactively. You respond to threats instead of shaping the situation before the threat arrives. You've never been taught to do otherwise, because everyone who could have taught you was fighting for survival too." Harry stared at him. "I've been alive for 33 years, Clark said. "I spent 12 of them learning to control something that could level a city block if I got it wrong. I've trained with people whose entire existence is a masterclass in making power into precision." He met Harry's eyes without flinching. "I'm not offering you pity, Potter. I'm offering you something better." "What's that?" "A framework. Not for magic, you know that better than I ever could. But for everything around it. Discipline, strategy, how to think under pressure instead of through it, how to be the most dangerous person in the room without needing the room to know it." The rain hit the window in a long gust. The fire in the hearth threw a pulse of orange light across the table. Harry thought about it, which was not long actually. Because under all of it, under the emptiness and the exhaustion and the hollow where purpose had been, there was something he hadn't been able to name for months. It lived at the bottom of the restlessness. It was small, but it burned steady. More, not greed, not hunger, just more understanding, more skill. More capacity to actually help rather than to survive. More than being the boy the prophecy pointed at. More than the war's last move. He set his mug down. "When do we start?" Clark looked at him for a moment. Something in his face, not quite a smile. A different thing, a kind of recognition, the kind that passes between people who are made of similar material. "Tomorrow," he said. "We go back to the pod first. I need to pull everything I can from the navigation record, the interference patterns timestamp, origin coordinates, energy type. Then we send a message to someone who can help with the magical analysis." He leaned forward slightly. "And then I'm going to run you into the ground." "You're going to try," Harry said. Clark looked at him. Harry looked back. The old woman's terrier sneezed. One of the farmers conceded a minor point about drainage. Outside, the Highlands kept raining, dark and cold and enormous, the way places do when they've been there long before you and intend to be there long after. But inside the pub there was warmth and light, and the particular energy of two people who have just made a decision that will change the shape of things. Neither of them slept much that night. Harry sat on the floor of the rental cottage he'd been using, back against the wall, wand balanced across his knees, and thought about what it meant that Superman had crashed in his valley, that someone had designed a weapon to knock Superman out of the sky, and that said Superman had taken one look at him and said, "I want to train you." He thought about what Clark had said: reactive, improvised, fearless but not strategic. He thought about every duel he'd ever fought, every crisis he'd survived, and tried, honestly tried, to find a moment where he'd been more than one step ahead of the problem. It was a short list. He and Hermione had planned, and the plans had mostly gone sideways, and what had gotten him through was instinct and the unshakable refusal to give up, which were excellent survival tools but were not, Clark was right, the same as genuine strategic mastery. He thought about the interference device. Someone in the Carpathians, working with a technology that could knock a Kryptonian craft out of the sky, working with or through magic. He thought about the fact that it had happened over Scotland, over him. The invisibility cloak was folded on the small table by the window. Harry looked at it for a long time. Then he got up, packed what little he'd brought, set the cottage back to rights with a few quick spells, and went outside into the rain that had eased now to a cold drizzle. Clark was sitting on the low stone wall outside the cottage. He hadn't knocked. He'd just waited, which said something about him. "You knew I'd be up," Harry said. "I could hear you thinking," Clark said dryly. "You can literally hear people thinking, not literally." But when someone's pacing in a small stone room at 2 in the morning, the rhythm's distinctive. He looked at Harry's pack. Ready? Yeah. They walked back up the hill in the dark, toward the crater where the pod lay cooling, toward whatever signal it held about where this had started. The drizzle swept in curtains across the heather. Harry could barely see 3 feet ahead of him. Clark walked beside him without any apparent difficulty, those eyes, Harry thought, working in ranges Harry couldn't access. What do you think they're building? Harry asked. Something that can target us both. Clark didn't hesitate. Not just me. The interference pattern was hybrid, 2 power sources, 2 targeting systems, 1 Kryptonian frequency filter, and 1 that was specifically calibrated to magical resonance. He paused. Which means whoever built it already understands both systems well enough to engineer against them. That's really bad, Harry said. Yes, and you want to walk toward it. There's no useful direction that doesn't go toward it. Harry thought about that for a moment, boots going through wet heather, rain on his face, the dark valley below. He thought about a 17-year-old kid walking into the forbidden forest alone because there was no useful direction that didn't go toward it. Some things, he supposed, were consistent. You said you could hear me thinking, Harry said, so you should already know I'm in. Clark was quiet for 3 steps. Then I wanted to hear you say it. Yeah. Harry looked sideways at him through the dark. I figured. They reached the crater, and the pod, and the cold blue light still pulsing faintly at the heart of it. Clark crouched and went to work on the navigation record with his hands, and whatever it was he could do with his eyes that Harry was going to have to ask about at some point. Harry stood at the rim of the crater and looked at the sky, dark now. The storm moved through, stars beginning to appear in patches between the remaining cloud. He thought, someone out there built a trap, and Superman fell into it, and I pulled him out of it. He thought, whatever comes next, I am not hiding in the Highlands for another 3 weeks. He thought, more. And somewhere in the dark of the Scottish Highlands, a half-buried Kryptonian pod and a young wizard with lightning bolt scar and the last son of a dead world crouched in a crater together, and something that hadn't existed a day ago became real, a partnership, a beginning, an answer to the particular shape of both their empty spaces. The stars came out, one by one, in the cleared sky above them. Harry put his hand in his pocket and closed it around his wand and breathed. Ready. Chapter 2. The weight of the crest the first morning of training nearly killed Harry. Not literally. Clark had made that clear at the outset, with the particular precision of someone who understood the difference between this will hurt and this will break you, and who considered it his job to stay on the correct side of that line. But Harry was drenched in sweat at 6:45 in the morning with his lungs on fire and his legs shaking, standing on a flat expanse of moorland 2 miles from the crater, and the distinction felt academic. Again, Clark said. Harry turned and ran. Not with magic. That was the first rule Clark had established at 5 in the morning, when he'd knocked on the door of the replacement cottage Harry had found. A different one, further up the hill, smaller, colder, better, and said no wand for the first 2 hours. Harry had looked at him, and Clark had looked back with the calm certainty of someone who decided something before the conversation started, so Harry had pocketed his wand and gone outside into the pre-dawn dark and started running. They'd been at it for nearly 2 hours. The circuit was a mile loop that climbed 200 feet across its northern arc, which didn't sound significant until you'd done it 6 times at a pace Clark set by running alongside Harry and occasionally, almost conversationally, saying faster. Clark's version of running was a deliberate underperformance. Harry had quickly understood. He was matching Harry's pace on purpose, staying just far enough ahead to be a target, and just fast enough that Harry couldn't close the gap without redlining. It was deeply annoying and also, Harry had to admit, effective. He finished the circuit and bent over with his hands on his knees, breathing in great heaving pulls. Time, Clark said. I don't care about the time right now. 7 minutes, 40 seconds, down from 8:12 on the first circuit. Clark was standing with his arms folded, watching Harry with the detached focus of someone running calculations. Not cold, but professional in a way that had its own kind of temperature. You slow on the uphill because you lean into it. Your center of gravity drops and you shorten your stride to compensate. It's instinct. It's also wrong. Harry straightened up. I know how to run. You know how to move quickly when you're frightened or angry. That's different from knowing how to run. Clark looked at the hill. Running is about economy. Every wasted motion is energy you don't have for what comes after. He looked back at Harry. You had a war with no end date. You learned to spend yourself completely in every engagement because you didn't know if there'd be a next one. I need to break that habit. Harry wiped his face with his sleeve. You've thought about this a lot. Since last night. He said it without apology. I pulled everything I could from your public record and what the Justice League has on the Hogwarts conflict. You want to know what the pattern is? I have a feeling you're going to tell me. Every major confrontation. Graveyard Ministry, Malfoy Manor, the Battle of Hogwarts. You survived through three things consistently: improvisation, sacrifice, and other people. Clark's voice wasn't critical, it was anatomical. Any one of those three gets removed and the outcome changes. That's not a strategy. That's a miracle with good odds. I want to give you something that doesn't require a miracle. Harry stared at him. The morning was gray-white and cold, the sun not quite up, the moorland stretching away in every direction like a held breath. Other people, he said, you make that sound like a weakness. I make it sound like a variable you can't always control. Clark met his eyes steadily. The people around you nearly died saving you repeatedly. Some of them did die, not because you failed them, because the plan depended on their being there, and life doesn't guarantee that. A pause. A plan should be able to function in the worst case. Harry's jaw worked. He thought about Fred. He thought about Sirius. He thought about Dumbledore standing at the top of a tower saying, "Severus, please," and whether that had been a part of the plan all along or whether it had been someone failing to build something that could survive the worst case. Fine, he said. What's next? Clark almost smiled. Not quite, but the corner of something moved. Breathwork. Then we talk about how your magic interacts with your physical state, because from what I've read, a significant portion of wizards underestimate that connection entirely. They sat on a flat rock and Clark talked, and Harry listened. He was good at listening. Clark had discovered, not the nodding, waiting for his turn kind of listening, but the real kind, where the eyes go slightly still and the person is actually processing, turning things over, looking for where the idea breaks down. Clark filed that away. It was the mark of someone who'd learned that information was survival, that tuning out in the wrong moment could kill you. It had made Harry a good student in ways that had nothing to do with any classroom. Your magic responds to emotional state, Clark said, not just intense state. The strongest spells you've cast have come from extreme fear, grief, rage, or love. That's documented. Voldemort himself commented on it. He let the name land without apology. The problem is that emotional state dependency is unpredictable. You can't always manufacture the exact feeling on demand. And a fight that goes longer than 30 seconds will change your emotional register, whether you want it to or not. Harry was quiet, turning a piece of heather between his fingers. You're saying I need to decouple the magic from the emotion. Partially. Not entirely. The emotional amplification is genuine power and you shouldn't lose it, but you need a stable floor underneath it. Magic that works reliably at 60% regardless of how you're feeling, so the emotional peaks are additions, not load-bearing walls. He watched Harry's face. Does that map to anything you know? Hermione, Harry said immediately. Hermione's magic is like that. It's consistent. Sometimes brilliant, but always consistent. Mine and Ron's are spikier. He paused. She'd probably love to hear that described as a stable floor. Is she someone I can contact? Harry glanced at him. About the interference pattern. You said last night that the magical analysis needs someone who understands signatures well. If she's the most technically precise, which you know, she's the most technically precise person I know, Harry said. But I don't want to pull her into this before we understand what this is. Clark looked at him for a moment. He seemed to weigh it. Fair, we pull the origin coordinates first. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd changed from the suit, was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans and a gray pullover that somehow still looked like a uniform on him, and produced the hexagonal memory core from the pod. He held it up. In the morning light, it had a faint blue iridescence to it, like a beetle's wing. The nav record is intact. I need three things from it: timestamp, origin coordinates, and the frequency signature of the interference. The frequency is the fingerprint. If someone's used this before, or if there's a recorded analog in the wizarding world, that's our lead. Harry reached out and touched the core. It hummed against his fingertips, not warm, not cold, something laterally different, a vibration at a frequency he didn't have a word for. His magic curled toward it like a dog sniffing something unknown, cautious and interested. It doesn't push me away, he said. Tonian technology isn't anti-magical the way I indicated last night. It's neutral. The interference device was specifically engineered for interaction. That took work. By default, the tech and magic don't really see each other. Clark turned the core in his hand, which is part of why I find the device so concerning. Someone spent a significant amount of time engineering that compatibility. That's not improvised. That's a program, Harry said. That's a program, Clark agreed. Well-funded, well-informed, patient. He pocketed the core. I want to pull the full data tonight. I need a sunnier day to work properly. There's a photovoltaic element to how my vision systems operate at higher resolution, and Scotland in autumn is terrible. Consistently overcast, Clark said, which was diplomatic. There's a sun-based magic spell, Harry said thoughtfully. Might not work on Kryptonian tech, but I can try. Something that simulates solar spectrum light. Lumos Maxima variant, Hermione developed it for field work in dark environments, but the spectrum she was targeting was specifically. He stopped, looked at Clark. You absorb yellow sunlight. Clark was watching him with quiet attention. Yes. She designed the variant for reading in the field without alerting anyone with obvious wand light. She modeled the spectrum off direct noon sun to preserve eye strain characteristics. Harry turned this over. If the wavelength matches what you need, it might work, Clark said, and he said it the way someone says something when they're slightly surprised to be saying it. Do you have a wand on you? I always have my wand on me. I thought today was no wand training. For physical conditioning. This is something else. He stood. Show me. Harry stood, pulled his wand, and said, close your eyes. Clark raised an eyebrow. Trust me, if it's the wrong spectrum, it'll just be light. But if it's right and you're not ready for it, it's going to feel like walking out of a dark room into midday. I'd rather you not be startled. Something moved in Clark's face. He'd been startled by very few things in his adult life, and being told to close his eyes by a 17-year-old wizard was clearly a novel experience. But he closed them. Harry pointed his wand at the sky above Clark and cast the modified Lumos, not the charm itself but Hermione's variant, which was technically a different spell family entirely, one she'd never bothered naming because she didn't name things she considered unfinished. The light expanded upward, not a beam but a bloom, spreading warm and gold-white against the gray sky, and Harry angled it down carefully, diffuse and even the way actual sunlight came down and not the way magical light usually worked. Clark's face changed. It was subtle. Harry almost missed it, but there was a relaxation in the jaw, a slight easing in the shoulders, the way a person settles when they didn't know they were tense until the tension is gone. His breathing deepened by about a half-second on the exhale. He opened his eyes and they were very bright. He paused. That's close, very close. He looked at Harry's wand. A witch invented that. She invented most of the useful things, Harry said. I mostly pointed them at people. The light faded as Harry ended the charm. Clark was quiet for a moment, and he was looking at Harry with an expression Harry didn't quite know what to do with, something between appreciation and recalibration, like a man revising an estimate upward. We'll use that tonight, Clark said. Maintaining it for 2 hours continuous should give me enough resolution to pull the full nav record. He looked at Harry. Can you do that? 2 hours, controlled output, stable spectrum. I've never done it for 2 hours, which means you haven't done it yet, not that you can't. He looked at him. That's another thing we need to work on. You use capability like a fixed resource, something you either have or don't. Magic's not a bank account. Then what is it? Clark thought about this. He was looking out at the moorland, at the hills going gray-green to gray-blue in the distance, and Harry watched him think in real time, watched him search for the right analogy. Muscle, Clark said finally. It's muscle. You have what you've trained. Training changes what you have. He looked back at Harry. You've been improvising under combat conditions for 7 years. Your instinct muscle is extraordinary. Your endurance muscle, terrible. Yes, I got that from the running. Your precision muscle is better than you think and not as good as it could be. He paused. And your patience muscle is non-existent. That's fair. Let's go. They trained until noon. Clark drilled Harry in things that had no magical component and yet were entirely about how magic functioned in practice. Breath control, proprioception, balance under sustained load, the ability to perform fine motor tasks while under cardiovascular stress. Harry fell twice, failed 6 attempts at writing his own name with his non-dominant hand while running the circuit at speed, and successfully balanced on 1 foot for 11 minutes while Clark read aloud from a transfiguration theory text and periodically changed the sentence midway through, testing whether Harry could track 2 information streams at once. He could, as it turned out, but only if he stopped thinking about what he was doing. Stop managing, Clark said. When you stop managing, you do it. When you start managing, you fall. That's the least helpful instruction I've ever received. It's the most accurate one. Clark watched him regain his balance. You're applying conscious attention to a task that functions best without it. Your body knows how to stand on 1 foot. Your mind keeps second-guessing it. A pause. This is the same reason your defensive casting has tells. Harry looked at him sharply. My casting has tells. 3. Your left shoulder drops before a shield charm, not much, but enough. You look at your target's wand hand when you're calculating the riposte, which means your eyes give the direction of your next spell away. And Clark's expression was careful. You breathe out on attack and in on defense, every time, like clockwork. The silence was the specific silence of someone being told something true that they really wish they'd known much earlier. How do you know that? Harry said. You've never seen me duel. I watched footage this morning. He said it simply. The Ministry of Magic keeps records of sanctioned dueling. Some of your training sessions at Hogwarts were documented. And the Battle of Hogwarts had a significant amount of accidental recording between Muggle equipment on the grounds and a few magical documents that activated as historical record. He paused. You're extraordinary, Harry, but you have tells, and anyone who fights you twice knows them. Harry stood very still. Voldemort knew, he said quietly. Yes, and he used them. Yes, Clark's voice didn't flinch from it. The graveyard, he knew you'd attack, not defend when pushed hard enough. He engineered the situation to guarantee that priori incantatem would happen because he'd calculated that you'd go on the offensive and lock wands. He used your most consistent tell against you, a beat. You survived anyway, but you survived by miracle, not by design. Harry exhaled slowly through his nose. Right, so. What do we do about tells? We replace them, Clark said, deliberately, not by eliminating the physical habits, that takes years, but by introducing controlled variants. You breathe out on attack, fine. We introduce a second attack pattern that doesn't use that breath, and we drill it until the two are indistinguishable. We do the same with the shoulder drop and the eye movement. He looked at Harry steadily. By the time we're done, your tells will be there, but they'll be weapons, not windows, because you control what they indicate. Harry thought about that for a moment. You turn them into feints, he said. Now you're thinking like a strategist. They broke for lunch at a spot where a small stream crossed the moor, and Clark produced, inexplicably, 2 wrapped sandwiches from the interior of the jacket that didn't appear to have pockets large enough to hold them. Harry looked at the sandwich. He looked at Clark. Where were those? Thermal interior pocket. Clark sat on a rock and began eating. I had the barman at the pub put them together this morning before we came out. At 5 in the morning, he was already up. He keeps unusual hours. A beat. His name is Alastair. He has a daughter at university in Edinburgh. He's been running the pub since his father died 9 years ago, and he likes it, which is rarer than people think. Harry stared at him. You learned all that this morning in the time it took to get sandwiches. It's not effort, Clark said. I just listen. People talk. Most of them want someone to hear them. He looked at the stream, and there was something in his face that was almost private. It's one of the things I like about this, about being around people. Everyone's carrying something interesting. Harry thought about the way Clark had looked at him last night and this morning, not like a mission. Not like a problem, like a person worth paying attention to. He unwrapped the sandwich. It had mustard on it, which Harry had not requested but which turned out to be correct. Tell me about the justice leg, Harry said. Clark ate for a moment. What do you want to know? What it's like, working with people who have that kind of power. He paused. Whether it's anything like what I had. Clark considered this seriously, which Harry appreciated. He didn't deflect or give the press release version. It's harder than working alone, Clark said, which is the opposite of what people expect. Alone, you make decisions and live with them. With a team at that level, Bruce has a plan for every scenario. Diana has seen most of them before in some form. Barry moves so fast that sometimes by the time the rest of us understand the situation, he's already altered it. He set the sandwich down briefly. The question isn't capability. Everyone has more than enough. The question is trust, whether you can commit to someone else's call when you disagree, and whether they can commit to yours. Can they? A pause that said something. Bruce almost never can. Diana almost always can. Barry, something almost amused. Barry usually commits to everything immediately and then improvises his way through the consequences, which terrifies Bruce and doesn't bother Diana at all. Harry smiled properly for the first time in what felt like weeks. It surprised him. Sounds like us, he said. Ron committed to everything immediately, and Hermione was Diana, and I was somewhere in between. You were the one they trusted to make the call when it couldn't wait, Clark said. He wasn't flattering Harry, he was reading the record. That's a specific role. It's not the same as leadership. It's closer to being the axis the team rotates around. People trusted you not because you were always right, but because you were always in it, fully in it, no exit. Harry was quiet. Do you miss it? Clark asked. The team. I see them constantly, Harry said. It's not the same as missing people. He paused, tried to find words for the specific shape of it. We were formed by the thing we fought. Without the thing, we're still us, but the version of us that knew exactly why it mattered, exactly what we were doing and why, that's gone. We're 4 people who love each other trying to figure out who we are when we're not at war. Clark looked at him for a long moment. That's the most honest thing you've said since we met. Don't get used to it. They ate in silence for a bit. the stream doing its stream business beside them, a couple of grouse moving through the heather further up the slope with the slow, important energy of animals going about serious bird work. "The symbol on your suit," Harry said. "What does it mean?" Clark looked at his hands for a moment. "On Krypton, it was the symbol of my family's house, my biological family." A pause. It had an abstract philosophical meaning in that context, something close to hope, though the direct translation doesn't carry the full weight of it. He looked up. "On Earth it means something else. I didn't give it that meaning. People did. Over time, because of specific things I chose to do." "How do you feel about that?" Harry asked. "People deciding what you mean." "I feel like it's not about me," Clark said, which was the most compressed version of something enormous that Harry had ever heard anyone say. "I'm not the symbol. The symbol is the idea. If the idea is worth having, if it actually helps people, whether that's connected to me or not is beside the point." He looked at Harry. "You have a symbol too." Harry touched the scar on his forehead without thinking about it, then stopped. "That one wasn't chosen," he said. "Neither was mine," Clark said. "We chose what to do with them." Harry thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. The afternoon session was different. Clark had found, Harry didn't ask how, but suspected the ears, a broad, flat section of granite shelf half a mile from the cottage, invisible from the road, large enough to move in, and he'd cleared it of loose debris before Harry arrived, which had involved, based on the evidence, throwing some fairly large rocks a fair distance. "Now we work on magic," Clark said. "Specifically, magic under physical duress." "I've done magic under physical duress," Harry said. "It's basically all I've done for 7 years. Fear duress, pain duress." Clark looked at him steadily. "I'm talking about physical conditioning duress, the kind where the challenge isn't the threat but the simple fact that your body is spent." He gestured at the space. "Cast a Patronus." Harry raised his wand and a stag erupted from the tip, silver-white and enormous, antlers spanning the gray air, hooves striking sparks from nowhere as it circled and came to stand beside Harry with the quiet authority of something that understood what it was. "Good," Clark said. "Now run the circuit, 3 miles. Flat out, come back and cast it again." Harry looked at him. "What?" Clark said. Harry pocketed his wand and ran. 3 miles at full speed in heavy boots over uneven highland terrain took just over 19 minutes and felt approximately like dying. He came back breathing like a freight train, legs on fire from the wet heather, sweat drenched in the cold air, and stopped in front of Clark and pulled his wand and cast the Patronus. The stag came, but it was dimmer. Still solid, still recognizable, but the light was less intense, and it dissolved after 8 seconds instead of sustaining. Harry stared at where it had been. "You see it," Clark said. "It's linked to emotion," Harry said, breathing hard. "When I'm physically spent, I can't access the feeling as cleanly. It dims the output." "Yes." "Which means anyone who can outlast you physically gains an advantage that has nothing to do with their magical ability." He watched Harry's face. "How do you feel right now?" "Terrible." "Cast it again." "It'll be worse, I know, cast it again." Harry cast it again. It was worse. The stag was translucent, barely there, gone in 3 seconds. "Again." "Clark, again." Harry squared his jaw, found the memory, serious, laughing at Grimmauld Place, alive and cast. The stag came back. Slightly dimmer than the second attempt, but noticeably brighter than the first attempt after the run. Harry blinked at it. It held for 5 seconds, 6, and then faded. "What just happened?" he said. "You dug," Clark said. "When you couldn't find the feeling at the surface, you went deeper. You found a version of it that doesn't live in your immediate emotional register. It lives somewhere further down, where the physical state can't reach as easily." He looked at Harry steadily. "That's the stable floor. You just found the edge of it." A pause. "The training is building a path to it. Every time you access it in a compromised state, the path gets wider." Harry lowered his wand. He was still breathing hard, but there was something moving in his chest that wasn't exertion. "You knew I'd find it," he said. "I thought you would. You've got strong emotional bedrock. Some people don't. Their Patronus just goes out under that kind of load. Yours found a second gear." Clark looked at him. "That's not technique, that's character. You're almost complimentary when you're not telling me my left shoulder drops." "I contain multitudes," Clark said dryly. Harry laughed, a proper one, short and surprised. Clark's expression did the thing it had done earlier, not quite a smile, but its immediate neighbor. They worked for another 2 hours, varying the physical load, the complexity of the spell, the emotional target. Clark was precise and relentless and completely unhurried, never impatient in the way of someone who'd expected faster progress, but never letting up in the way of someone who understood that the only way through a threshold was through it. By the time the light was going, Harry had cast a sustained Patronus for 40 seconds while running at 3/4 speed, which had never happened in any training session at Hogwarts, and had successfully executed the shoulder drop feint 3 times in succession on a target Clark held up. Target was Clark himself, standing with his arms at his sides, and on the third feint he hadn't moved at all, because the spell had gone exactly where Harry had intended it to go and not where the shoulders suggested, and it had hit the boulder 6 feet to Clark's left and left a scorch mark the size of a dinner plate in the granite. Clark had looked at the scorch mark for a moment, then at Harry. "That's an aggressive reductor curse. Second most powerful one in my repertoire," Harry said. "I went conservative. Good choice." He was looking at the scorch mark with thoughtful eyes. "We should probably be doing this somewhere that doesn't have granite. I'll have to explain later." "There's a lot of granite in Scotland." "Yes, there really is." That night they sat in the cottage with the nav core on the table between them, and Harry held the modified Lumos variant for 2 hours while Clark worked, his eyes moving over the core with the surgical focus of something that wasn't quite looking at it in any conventional sense. The heat vision, Harry understood, reading the data and the material at a microscopic level, pulling information that human eyes and human instruments couldn't have touched. Harry held the spell. It was harder than he'd expected. 2 hours of sustained precise spectrum light was a different kind of challenge to casting under physical load. It was endurance, not intensity, the magical equivalent of holding a weight at arm's length rather than lifting it. His arm never tired, but his concentration kept trying to drift, and he had to keep finding the edge of the attention and pulling it back, the same way you have to keep pulling your mind back when you're trying to meditate. He thought about the path to the stable floor. He thought about the second gear. He thought about tells turned into feints. At the end of the 2 hours, Clark sat back and said, "Got it." And Clark looked at the table for a moment. When he looked up, his expression was the one he had when the news was significant. Not panicked, Harry was already understanding, didn't panic, but focused in the particular way a person focuses when the scope of a problem becomes clear. The interference pattern originated from a facility in the Eastern Carpathians, Romanian-Hungarian border region. He laid a hand on the table and a faint light spread from his fingertips. Harry stared, then realized it was a holographic projection from the core, rough but functional, showing a topographic map. Here, this valley, remote but not inaccessible. What kind of facility? The energy signature associated with the origin point has 2 components. Clark's finger moved over the map. One is technological, advanced, probably post-human, not anything currently in public use. The other, he paused. The other is specifically magical, old magical, the kind of signature that comes from a site that's been used for magical purposes over a long period of time. He looked at Harry. Decades at minimum, possibly longer. Harry leaned over the map. The valley Clark was indicating was a fold between 2 ridges, no roads visible within 15 miles of it. Someone's been operating there for decades and nobody knows about it. The wizarding community hasn't flagged it. I cross-referenced the International Confederation of Wizards territorial monitoring logs. I have a contact in their liaison office, and that location doesn't appear in any report. Clark looked at Harry, which either means they don't know it exists or they know and haven't said. Or they know and they're involved, Harry said. Clark met his eyes. Or that. They looked at the map together. "Who are they?" Harry asked. "I have a name," Clark said. From a secondary signal embedded in the interference pattern structure, a kind of signature, not deliberate, I don't think, more like a fingerprint left by accident. He paused. Aldrich Voss. The name meant nothing to Harry, he said so. Former augmentation researcher with the European arm of a now-defunct military program, Clark said. The public file is thin. What I know from League intelligence is more concerning. He looked at Harry. He was augmented, physically enhanced, using a combination of experimental biology and borrowed technology. Smart, disciplined, and in his own words, another pause. In his own words, he believes that enhanced individuals, people like us, represent an existential threat to baseline humanity, and that the only solution is either control or elimination. Harry let that sit. He wants to get rid of people like us. He wants to get rid of the danger of people like us, Clark said, and the distinction was careful and deliberate, which makes him harder to argue with, because he's not wrong that we are dangerous. He's wrong about what follows from that. A very long pause. He used to be an ally, not mine directly, a peripheral contact of the League's. He assisted with a containment operation in Prague 3 years ago. He was effective and his methods were acceptable. Clark's jaw was tight. Something changed. What changed him? Clark looked at the map. The holographic valley glowed faint blue on the table. That's what I need to find out, before he tests his next device. Harry looked at the valley, then at Clark, then back. We're going to need Hermione, he said. Clark looked at him. I know, Harry said. I said I didn't want to involve her yet, I know. He pressed his fingers together on the table. But if there's an old magical site being used as a power source for hybrid technology, I need someone who can read that history. I can fight. She can understand. There's a difference. He met Clark's eyes. And you said it yourself this morning. A plan that depends on variables you can't control is a miracle, not a strategy. Clark was quiet for a moment. Then, precisely, when did you start quoting me back at me? About 10 seconds ago. Is it working? I was already going to say yes, Clark said. I wanted to see if you'd argue for her. Harry sat back. You've been testing me all day. I've been learning you all day, Clark said. There's a difference. He looked at Harry directly. You argued for your friend. You admitted you needed something you couldn't provide yourself. You did it in about 30 seconds of silence, which means you don't sit on obvious calls out of pride. He held Harry's gaze. Those are good signs. Glad I could pass. You're not done, Clark said. Tomorrow's worse. Harry looked at him. Worse how? I'm going to introduce you to the concept of working at altitude. I'm already in the Scottish Highlands. Higher, Clark said, and faster. Harry stared at him. Then the implication landed, and his eyes went fractionally wider. Your magic should work at approximately 30,000 feet, theoretically. Clark looked at him with the calm of someone for whom 30,000 feet was a ground floor problem. It'll be fine. Theoretically, Harry said. You were the boy who flew into a department of mysteries on a borrowed broom to fight Death Eaters, Clark said. Don't look at me like that. Harry opened his mouth, closed it. He was not going to give Clark the satisfaction of arguing the point when the point was accurate. Outside, the Highlands had gone fully dark, the stars overhead in their brilliant, careless multitudes, the kind of sky that only exists when there are no cities for 50 miles in any direction. Harry looked at the map. He looked at the valley in the Carpathians, glowing blue on the table. He thought about Aldrich Voss and the device that had knocked Superman out of the sky and the old magic in that far-off hillside. He thought about tomorrow and altitude and the particular terrifying joy of being told to go higher. He thought, I am not bored anymore. And somewhere in the Scottish night, a man who could bend steel and a boy who'd walked out of death were sitting across a table from each other and planning, which is another way of saying they were building the future, one decision at a time, the way all futures get built. The stars didn't care. They shone anyway. Chapter 3, Fault Lines. Hermione arrived on a Tuesday, which meant she'd reorganized her entire week to be there by Monday night, and then spent the extra time preparing arguments for every possible objection Harry might raise. He knew this because when she stepped out of the fireplace in the cottage, Harry had connected the grate to the Flu network the evening before, which had involved a moderately illegal workaround he didn't tell Clark about. She was carrying a bag that was clearly undetectable extension, charmed to hold approximately a library, and she had the expression of someone who'd rehearsed. She took one look at Harry, and her expression changed. You look better, she said, and the relief in it was something she hadn't intended to show. I feel better. He hugged her properly, and she held on for a moment longer than the hug required, which was its own kind of conversation. Then she stepped back, pushed her hair out of her face, and looked around the cottage with the systematic attention of someone cataloging a crime scene. Her eyes moved from the two mugs on the table to the nav core, sitting in the center, to the topographic map Clark had rendered on a piece of paper, using a method Harry still wasn't sure he fully understood, some combination of precise visual recall and a borrowed pen. To the stack of Transfiguration, theory texts in the corner that were Harry's, and the 3 thick volumes on Kryptonian physics that were Clark's, and which Harry had tried reading on the first night, and gotten through 9 pages before his brain quietly resigned. Where is he? She asked. Outside. He does that. He goes up sometimes. Hermione looked at the ceiling, then at Harry. Up. He'll be back. He knows you're coming. Harry moved toward the kettle. Tea. Obviously tea, Harry. It's 8:30. She set her bag down and pulled out a notebook that had "Do Not Touch" written on the cover in 3 languages and 1 runic script. Tell me everything from the beginning, he told her. She listened without interrupting, which was a skill she'd developed sometime during the war when she'd accepted that Harry told stories in a non-linear order that reflected how he'd experienced them rather than how they'd occurred, and that interrupting only made it longer. She wrote things in the notebook. Her pen moved in quick economical strokes, and occasionally she made a small sound, not quite a word, more like a punctuation mark that meant interesting or concerning, or I have 17 questions about that. When he got to the Carpathian Valley and the old magical site, she stopped writing. How old? She said. Clark said decades minimum. Clark said, she looked at her notes. His estimate was based on residual energy signature, based on what he could read from the interference pattern's frequency. He said old magical signatures have a specific layering, like geological strata. The older the site, the more layers. That's correct, Hermione said, with the tone of someone surprised to be conceding a point to a person who wasn't a trained magical analyst. It's called palimpsest resonance in theoretical magical cartography. Every working leaves a trace in the ambient magical field of a location. Over time, those traces compound. A sufficiently sensitive reader can estimate the age of a site's magical use to within a decade or so. She looked up from the notebook. Who taught him that? I don't think he was taught it. I think he read everything available and synthesized it. Hermione was quiet for a moment. I'm going to like him, she said, in the tone of someone who'd been prepared not to. The door opened and Clark came in from outside, which was mildly startling because Harry hadn't heard footsteps on the path. He was wearing the gray pullover again, hair slightly disheveled from altitude, and he ducked slightly through the doorframe, not quite necessary but apparently a reflex, and looked at Hermione with the calm, attentive expression he brought to everything. Hermione stood. She was 5'5" and Clark was 6'3", and the height differential was significant, but she looked at him with the complete absence of intimidation that had always been one of her best qualities. Hermione Granger, she said, extending her hand. Clark Kent, he shook it. I've read some of your published work on ambient magical field theory. The paper on temporal resonance in cursed objects was particularly useful. Hermione blinked. It was barely visible, but Harry caught it, the fractional surprise of someone not expecting their academic work to have been read by Superman. That was published in a very limited circulation journal, she said. 15 copies. I found one in the Bodleian's restricted collection. He sat down across from her, with the ease of someone who decided to trust her before she'd walked in, which Harry suspected was exactly what had happened. Your methodology on palimpsest resonance is what I used to estimate the Carpathian site's age. You should know your work contributed to that analysis. Hermione sat back down and looked at Clark for a long moment. Then she looked at Harry. He's citing my papers, she said. I know. At 8:30 in the morning. He's been doing this to me for 3 days. You get used to it. Clark reached for the nav core and set it in the center of the table. I want to show you the frequency signature of the interference pattern. I've isolated the magical component from the technological component. They're separable if you look at the phase relationship between the two signals. He looked at Hermione. The magical component has 2 distinct layers. A base frequency that's consistent with high-intensity dark magic workings, and a secondary frequency I can't identify. I've cross-referenced everything in the publicly available magical literature, and it doesn't match any known tradition. Hermione leaned forward and looked at the core. Then she reached into her bag and produced a small instrument that looked like a compass, but with 4 needles instead of 1 and a dial face covered in runic notations. May I? Clark nodded. She held the instrument over the core and tapped it twice. The needles moved, settled, moved again. She went very still. What? Harry said. She didn't answer immediately. She was reading the needles with the focused intensity of someone for whom data was delivering news. Then she sat back and looked at Clark. You said this was tested deliberately, as a proof of concept. Yes, then they know it works, she said. Because this, she looked at the instrument again. The secondary frequency in this signature is precontatio obscura, ancient dark magic, pre-medieval. It's not a tradition, it's a power source. Specifically, it's the magical resonance that accumulates in sites where large-scale death has occurred over long periods. She looked between them. Battlefields, mass graves, places of sustained historical violence. A pause. The Carpathian Basin is one of the most historically violent regions in Europe. The cottage was quiet except for the fire. They're harvesting it, Harry said. They've been harvesting it for decades, if Clark's age estimate is correct. Hermione closed the notebook. Someone has been systematically collecting precontatio obscura resonance from sites across Eastern Europe and funneling it into, what? A weapon, a power cell. She looked at Clark. The interference device that brought you down, was it a one-time discharge or did it have a sustainable power rating? Sustainable, Clark said. The pattern was designed for continuous operation. The discharge that hit my navigation array was a test pulse, not a full activation. He met Hermione's eyes. At full activation, a device running on that power source could maintain a continuous interference field across a significant area. How significant? Harry asked. Large enough to ground every Kryptonian technology craft in a continental airspace, Clark said, and if the magical component is calibrated correctly, to disrupt magical travel as well. Apparition portkeys flew. He looked at Harry. A field large enough to cover Europe. would leave both our communities unable to respond to a coordinated ground-based attack. Hermione pressed her fingers to her lips. Harry knew that gesture. That was the gesture she made when the implications were arriving faster than she could process them in order. Voss, Harry said. Who? Hermione said. Harry told her the name, told her what Clark had shared about the man. She listened and wrote, and when he got to the part about Voss's stated belief, enhanced individuals as existential threats, she stopped writing again. He's not wrong, she said. Both Harry and Clark looked at her. About the danger, she said precisely. He's not wrong that people with power well beyond the human range represent a genuine risk. History bears that out extensively. She looked at Harry. You know this. Voldemort was proof of it. Voldemort wanted to rule the world, Harry said. That's different. Is it? Voss presumably believes he's preventing the next Voldemort, or the next, she glanced at Clark. Whatever the equivalent is in your world. There have been equivalents, Clark said quietly. Right, Hermione looked at her notes, which means he has a logic, a real one, and people with real logic are considerably more dangerous than people with ambition. She tapped her pen on the notebook. He'll have supporters, people who look at the evidence and see his point. And if he deploys this device and it works, if he can genuinely ground enhanced individuals across a continent, some of those supporters will be in positions of authority. He wants to neutralize us before he makes his case publicly, Harry said. Remove the ability to respond and then walk in with the argument. Or remove the ability to respond and never need to make the argument at all, Clark said. The three of them sat with that. When? Hermione asked Clark. The test pulse was 11 days ago. If they're running on a development schedule, which the sophistication of the device suggests they are, the next phase of testing would be within 3 to 4 weeks. He paused. Or they've already accelerated because the test succeeded. Hermione stood up and went to the window. The Highland morning was doing its gray, beautiful thing outside. She stood there for a moment with her arms folded. I need to go to the site, she said. No, Harry said. She turned and looked at him with the expression that meant he'd said something she'd been expecting and had prepared for. The palimpsest resonance analysis can't be done remotely. I need to physically read the magical strata of the site to understand exactly what they've built, what they're capable of, how to counter it. She looked at Clark. You know I'm right. She's right, Clark said. Harry looked at Clark. You're not supposed to agree with things that put people in unnecessary danger. She's correct about the methodology, Clark said. That doesn't resolve the question of timing or approach. He looked at Hermione. We're not going in 3 days from now without preparation. We go when we understand the site's defensive configuration and when Harry is ready. Harry started. Not ready, Clark said, with the calm certainty of someone reporting a weather condition. You're significantly improved from 4 days ago. You're not where you need to be for a facility run by someone who's been specifically engineering against our capabilities. He met Harry's eyes without a flicker. 3 more weeks, then we go. Harry felt the argument rising in him and then deliberately, consciously, the way Clark had been teaching him, he held it. Let it sit, looked at it from outside. 3 weeks wasn't an eternity. 3 weeks was training. 3 weeks was the difference between going in reactive and going in prepared. Fine, he said. 3 weeks. Hermione looked between them. There was something in her expression that wasn't quite surprise but was its immediate neighbor. She sat back down. In the meantime, I can do remote analysis of the frequency data. If I can model the resonance pattern, I can start building a countermeasure to the magical component. She looked at Clark. The technological component is your area. I've already started, he said. She nodded. And then, because she was Hermione and this had been sitting in her since she walked through the door, I want to watch the training. Harry looked at her. Why? Because you look different and I want to understand what's changed, clinically. She had the grace to add, and because I'm worried about you. I said I'm fine, you said you're better, that's not the same thing. She met his eyes directly. 4 months ago you were disappearing into yourself so thoroughly that Ron and I had to check whether you'd actually left or just stopped responding to letters. You're visibly more present now and I want to understand why so I can. She stopped. So you can what? Harry said. So I can not worry, she said quietly. So I can see for myself that this is good. Harry looked at her for a long moment. The fire crackled. Clark was very still in the way he went still when he was deliberately not interjecting, which Harry had come to recognize as a form of respect. Tomorrow morning, Harry said, 5 a.m. you'll need better shoes than those. She looked down at her shoes, which were entirely unsuitable for Highland moorland. I'll manage. You'll be in mud to the ankle in those by the second circuit. I'll cast a waterproofing charm. The ground's uneven, Harry. She looked at him. I'll manage. She managed. Barely, and with a cushioning charm applied to the soles of her shoes at the 3-mile mark, and an expression of pure bloody-minded stubbornness that Harry recognized from years of watching her refuse to be the weakest link in any room, but she managed. She ran the circuit twice, not 3 times, and not at Harry's pace, but fully and without complaint, and then stood at the edge of the granite shelf and watched Clark put Harry through the precision drills with the intent focus of a naturalist observing something rare. She watched the drills. She watched Harry's shoulder, the subtle drop Clark had identified. She watched him execute the faint variant, watched the spell go exactly where the body language hadn't indicated. Her pen moved in the notebook. "He's better," she said to Clark, who'd paused the drill to let Harry reset. Significantly, Clark looked at Harry, who was 30 feet away rolling his shoulders with the focused calm he'd been developing. His instinct reaction speed is close to the fastest I've seen in a non-enhanced human. The work is channeling that, not replacing it. "What's the ceiling?" Hermione asked. Clark was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "I've never trained someone with his power type before. There's a theoretical ceiling to physical conditioning and magical endurance. But the interaction between the two in Harry's case," he paused, "he integrates them. Most wizards compartmentalize. Magic is one thing, body is another. Harry doesn't do that. When his physical state peaks, his magic peaks with it. There's a feedback loop I haven't seen in the literature." Hermione looked at Harry. "No," she said thoughtfully. "It won't be in the literature. This is the same thing he does with." She stopped. "With what?" Clark asked. She considered how to say it. "Harry's magic has always responded to who he is, not what he knows. When he casts anything with genuine feeling behind it, love, grief, anger, protectiveness, the output is beyond what his formal training should produce. It's always been that way." She closed her notebook. "What you're doing is teaching him to be more himself under pressure, more present, more stable. Not calmer. Harry's never needed to be calmer. He needs to be clearer. And when he's clear," she looked at Clark, "the ceiling goes away." Clark looked at her for a moment. "You understand him very precisely. I've had 7 years and a front row seat to some remarkable evidence." She looked back at Harry. "Don't underestimate what he can do when he decides something matters. He'll walk through anything." "I know," Clark said quietly. "That's what I'm working around." Hermione looked at him sharply. "Working around it how?" "If Harry's greatest strength is the intensity of what he cares about, then his vulnerability is the same thing. Someone who understands that can engineer a situation specifically designed to weaponize his protectiveness." Clark's voice was level, not cold, thoughtful. "Voss's file shows a psychological profiling capability. He'll know about Harry. He'll know about the people Harry loves. A beat. So we need Harry to be strong enough that the people around him don't have to be used as leverage. Voss needs to look at Harry Potter and see someone who can't be moved that way because there's nothing to move." Hermione was very still. "You're trying to make him unassailable," she said. "I'm trying to make him complete," Clark said. "There's a difference." She looked at Harry for a long time. Harry was working through the faint sequence on his own, methodical and focused, running it clean and then deliberately introducing the shoulder tell, then masking it, then combining them, building the vocabulary of his own body into something he controlled rather than something that controlled him. He didn't know he was being watched, or if he did, he wasn't performing for it. He was just working. "All right," Hermione said. She sounded slightly unsteady, which for Hermione was the equivalent of weeping openly. "What do you need from me?" "The countermeasure for the magical component, like you said." And Clark looked at her. "I need you to tell me about precontatio obscura. Not just the academic definition, the practical reality. If Voss has been harvesting it for decades, what does a facility built on that kind of resonance do to people who enter it? What does extended exposure produce?" Hermione sat down on a rock, opened her notebook to a clean page, and began to talk. She talked for 40 minutes. Clark listened without interrupting, which she appreciated because it was what she did when people told her things, and she understood the value of the gift. He asked 3 questions, each one precise and building on the last, each one revealing he'd already understood everything she'd said before and wanted to go further. By the end, she was sitting slightly forward, her notebook full of cross-references and branching calculations, in the specific state she got into when a problem was interesting enough to temporarily displace all other concerns. Harry came back from the solo drilling session and looked at the two of them across the rock. "Are you solving something?" he said. "Trying to," Hermione said. "Is it about me?" "Everything is always about you," she said, which was her version of affection. The afternoon brought rain again, horizontal and serious, and they moved inside, and Clark spread the topographic map on the table and talked through the Carpathian Valley in detail. Not tactically, not yet. Information first, the shape of the land, the historical record, the accessible routes. He'd been building the intelligence picture since the night he'd pulled the data from the core, and the detail of it was considerable. Harry sat across from him and listened, and Hermione sat to the side and cross-referenced the geographical data against her mental index of magical sites in the region, annotating the map with a fine-tipped pen, noting 3 locations within 50 miles that were known sites of historical significance, and 2 more that she suspected but hadn't been formally catalogued. "This ridge," she said, tapping a line on the map. "There was a 14th century battle here. Hungarian-Wallachian conflict. Casualty figures from that period are unreliable, but some accounts put it in the thousands over 3 days." She looked at Clark. A sustained death event at that scale would leave a precontatio obscura signature that's still active after 700 years. If Voss is drawing from sites across this region, he's drawing from 7 centuries of accumulated death energy, Harry said flatly. "More." Hermione looked at the map. "This region was under Ottoman occupation, then Habsburg, then was the front line of 2 world wars. The magical resonance density here is," she paused, choosing words. "If he's engineered a collection and storage mechanism that's been running for decades, what he's sitting on is the magical equivalent of a nuclear stockpile," Clark said, "and now he's built a delivery system." They all looked at the map. "He's going to need a trigger event," Harry said, "something to justify deploying it. He won't just switch it on over a populated area, he'll want a reason, something that validates his argument about enhanced individuals being a threat." "Or he'll manufacture one," Clark said. "He won't need to," Hermione said quietly. "He just has to wait. The world produces incidents involving enhanced individuals regularly. Waits for one with sufficient scale and sufficient public visibility, and then he deploys." She looked at Clark. "Which means he's not on our timeline. He's on his own, and we don't know how long he's been waiting or what threshold he's set for himself. We need to accelerate," Harry said, looking at Clark. Clark looked at him steadily. "I told you 3 weeks. I heard you. I'm saying the situation might not give us 3 weeks. The situation has been developing for decades," Clark said. "It will not become critical in the next 18 days. Voss is patient. Everything about his operation indicates patience. He's been building this for 30 years. He's not going to rush the finale." He held Harry's gaze. 18 days. 17, Harry said. Clark looked at him. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. 17. Progress, Hermione said under her breath. That night after Hermione had gone to bed in the second room, she transfigured the storage room into something habitable with the casual competence of someone who did this regularly. Harry and Clark sat by the fire. It had become a thing, this, the end-of-day sitting. Not always talking. Sometimes Clark read and Harry thought, or Harry wrote letters he'd send in the morning to Ron and Ginny, carefully edited to contain no Carpathian valleys or Kryptonian pods. But the sitting was consistent. Harry had started to rely on it in a way he didn't examine too carefully. "She's right about what I can do," Harry said. Clark didn't ask for clarification. "I know. It scares you a bit." "Number," he said it without hesitation, which was more convincing than a denial that came with thinking. "It makes me careful. There's a difference." He looked at the fire. "I've trained with people who had power at that level. Diana, Barry in his own way. The thing about power like that is it's not the ability that matters, it's the question underneath it." He paused. "Diana knows exactly who she is. She's been answering that question for 3,000 years. She doesn't flinch at her own capacity because she's had millennia to make peace with it." "And I've had 17 years, Harry said. 15 of them spent being told the power was a target on your back," Clark said. "Not a gift, not even a tool, a mark." He looked at Harry. "That's what we're really working on, not the technique, not the endurance, the question." "What question?" Clark turned from the fire and looked at Harry directly. "Who are you when no one's pointing at you? When there's no prophecy, no Voldemort, no war. When someone asks, 'What do you want?' and the answer doesn't have to do with surviving or protecting someone, just what do you want for yourself?" Harry didn't answer. "You don't have one yet," Clark said. "That's not a failure, that's where you are." He turned back to the fire. "I didn't have one either for a long time. I had Smallville and my parents, and then I had a symbol and a responsibility, and then I had the League. I filled the space with purpose before I filled it with self." A pause. "It catches up with you. The question doesn't go away." "What's your answer?" Harry asked. Clark was quiet for a moment. "I want to believe people can be better, not should be, can be, that the worst moments don't define the direction." He looked at the fire. "And I want to write. I'm a journalist. Clark Kent is a journalist who writes stories about the people the news doesn't stop for. That matters to me in a way that has nothing to do with the cape." Something quiet and clear in his voice. "I want those two things to be consistent with each other." "Are they?" "Mostly." He looked at Harry. Your answer exists. You just haven't let yourself look for it yet because looking for it feels like abandoning the people who didn't get to look for theirs. Harry's jaw was tight. He looked at his hands. Clark let the silence be. He was good at that, never rushed to fill it, which meant when he did speak, it always counted. Fred, Harry said after a while. Yes, and Remus, and Tonks. His voice was steady. He'd gotten good at keeping it steady. All of them. There it feels like. He stopped, started again. Looking for what I want feels like having something they don't, like I don't have the right to it. That's grief talking, Clark said, not dismissively, honestly. The function of that feeling is to preserve connection with the people you lost. It's not a moral instruction. It's love without a direction. He paused. They didn't die so you could be hollow. That's not what they wanted. You don't know what they wanted. But I know Fred Weasley, from everything you've told me, sounds like someone who would be genuinely irritated to know you were sitting in a cottage in Scotland feeling guilty about being alive. Harry made a sound that was almost a laugh and absolutely wasn't. The fire settled lower. Outside the rain had stopped, and the wind was moving through the heather with the particular sound that wasn't quite a voice but could be mistaken for one in the dark. Tomorrow, Clark said, we go higher. Harry looked at him. How high? I want to see if your magic functions in the lower stratosphere. He said this with the complete calm of someone proposing a picnic. 20,000 feet. Temperature and pressure differentials at that altitude put significant physical stress on an unprotected human body. If your magic can compensate for that stress and still function at combat level, we have options we don't currently have. Harry stared at him. You'll be fine, Clark said. You keep saying that. And so far, Harry thought about the runs, the drills, the Patronus at full sprint, the 40-second sustained cast, the feint that had scorched granite. So far, he conceded. Clark looked at him with that not-quite smile. Then he stood and picked up the Kryptonian physics volumes from the floor. Get some sleep. We're up at 4:30. 4:30, Harry said. Not 5, we need the extra time. He looked at Harry over the top of the book. Altitude acclimatization. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, You're enjoying this. I don't know what you mean, Clark said, which was the most transparent thing he'd said since they'd met. Harry went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about Fred, and the question, and the space where purpose had been, and whether the shape of who he was becoming looked anything like the shape of who he was supposed to be, and whether supposed to be was even a useful frame anymore. He thought about the valley and the Carpathians, about Aldrich Voss and 30 years of patience and a weapon built from centuries of death, about a man who was almost right and therefore almost impossible to argue with. He thought about Clark saying the ceiling goes away. He thought about the answer to the question he hadn't found yet, and whether looking for it was permission or theft, and whether the difference between those two things was something he'd ever be able to work out. At 4 o'clock he stopped trying to sleep and got up and did the breathwork Clark had taught him, sitting on the floor in the dark, finding the stable floor, finding the second gear. At 4:25 there was a quiet knock on the door. Harry opened it. Clark was outside in the dark, fully awake, eyes doing the luminous thing they did before dawn when the light was low, and whatever Kryptonian biology was involved in his vision was working at full capacity. You were already up, Clark said. You could hear me. You breathe differently when you're doing the floor work. He looked at Harry. Good, it means it's becoming habit. They went up into the dark together, and the Highlands watched them go the way ancient things watch, without judgment, without urgency, with the deep indifferent patience of things that will be there long after the question is answered. Whatever the question was. Chapter 4. The message came from Eastern Europe at 3 in the morning on a Wednesday. Clark was already awake when it arrived. He slept less than 4 hours most nights, which Harry had stopped finding unsettling around day 5, and now accepted as one of the many ways Clark Kent was fundamentally a different category of being. Harry was in the middle of the breathwork when he heard Clark's voice through the wall, low and clipped, talking to someone on a communication device that wasn't a phone. The frequency was wrong, too clean, no cellular degradation. Harry was dressed and in the main room before Clark finished the call. Clark looked at him when he came out. His face was the controlled, level face he wore when the news was bad, and he'd already decided what to do about it. What happened? Harry said. Voss moved. Clark set the communication device on the table. It was small, matte black Justice League issue. A wizarding settlement in the Transylvanian Alps. Approximately 200 residents, mixed magical community, witches, wizards, a few magical creatures living on the periphery. They were running a contained existence, no engagement with Muggle world, no offensive magical activity. He paused. Voss deployed a localized version of the interference device, not the continental-scale weapon, a targeted field generator, probably a prototype. It grounded all magical travel in and out of the settlement. Harry was very still, and then, his people moved in, augmented soldiers, 6 of them based on the witness account. They were looking for something specific. They went directly to a single house at the edge of the settlement. 3 residents who tried to intervene were incapacitated. Clark's jaw was tight, non-lethally, deliberately. He didn't want casualties. He wanted the message. What message? That he can do it. That he can reach into a closed magical community, shut down their defenses, and take what he wants. Clark looked at Harry. They took a person, an elderly wizard named Emeric Vassarhelyi, 73 years old, former researcher in, of all things, theoretical magical technological integration. He worked on a joint Muggle-Wizard research program in the 1980s before the wizarding world shut it down. He paused. He was one of the only people alive who'd worked on combining the 2 systems practically. He took him because he needs him, Harry said. The device is built but not finished. Something in the integration doesn't work and he needs someone who understands both sides. That's my read. Clark looked at the topographic map. The Carpathian Valley glowed in the lamplight. This changes the timeline. Yes, Harry said. We go in. Yes, Harry said. Clark looked at him for a moment. I was going to say we need 4 days minimum to. I know, 4 days, fine. Harry turned toward the hallway. I'm waking Hermione. Harry, Clark's voice stopped him. Harry turned. Clark was looking at him with the careful, level attention he brought to things that mattered. This is what he wants, movement, a response that's rushed and emotional and reactive. He held Harry's gaze. 4 days isn't surrender. 4 days is the difference between walking in with a plan and walking in with anger, and anger is a wonderful fuel and a terrible driver. Harry looked at him for a long moment. I know, he said. I'm not angry. You're furious, Clark said simply. You're furious and you're covering it with the same stillness you use for the breathwork, and it's impressively done, but I can hear your heart rate from here. Harry exhaled. 4 days. 4 days, Clark confirmed. He woke Hermione. She came out of her room looking like someone who'd been deeply asleep and was refusing to acknowledge it, hair enormous, notebook already in hand from some reflex that operated independent of consciousness. Clark told her what he'd told Harry. She listened with the pen tapping steadily against the notebook cover, which was her version of barely contained urgency, and when he finished she said, Vassarhelyi. I know that name, his paper on parallel system architecture, magical and mechanical. It was suppressed by the International Confederation in 1987. They decided the research was too dangerous. She looked at Clark. If Voss has access to that theoretical framework and now has Vassarhelyi himself to implement it, the weapon becomes fully functional, Clark said. Not just functional, refined, targeted. Vassarhelyi understood how to make magical and technological systems communicate at the architectural level, not just interact at the surface. With him, Voss can build something that doesn't just interfere, it adapts. It reads the defensive magical signatures of whoever's in range and counters them specifically. She looked at Harry. It would mean the weapon knows your magic, in real time. Harry sat down at the table. He looked at the map. He thought about the people in that settlement, 200 of them, living quietly, bothering no one, and Voss walking in through their shut-down defenses with 6 soldiers and taking what he wanted from an old man's house. The fury was there, clean and cold, exactly where Clark had said it was. Harry let it sit, didn't push it down, didn't feed it, just let it be what it was, a fact about his internal state, and returned his attention to the map. The valley, he said. What do we know about the defensive setup? Clark sat down. From the nav core data and a secondary satellite pass I ran 2 days ago, the valley has a natural bowl shape that makes approach from above visible from inside. Any aerial approach within half a mile will be detected. He paused. Which means I can't fly in. But I can, Harry said. Broomstick, below the tree line on the western ridge. The bowl's shape means the line of sight from the valley floor is blocked by the ridge itself if the approach angle is right. Clark studied the map. The angle would have to be precise, 30 degrees or less from the ridge. I've flown at 30 degrees in a thunderstorm with a bludger on my tail. That's manageable. I'll come in from the east, Clark said. Ground level, following the river valley. If they have thermal or motion detection, they will, Hermione said. And if they have any magical sensing apparatus, it'll register you as a distinct non-magical life form. You'll stand out. Less than flying approach, Clark said. Ground movement through dense woodland at the river's edge. The thermal signature will blend if I stay close to the water. He looked at Hermione. You're not going in. The silence that followed this statement was the specific silence of someone preparing an argument they'd been building since the moment they understood the situation. I need to be on site to read the palimpsest resonance, Clark said. I know, you've said this, and you're correct about the methodology. He met her eyes steadily. And you're also correct that Voss will have profiled everyone connected to Harry, which means you are the most targeted person walking into that valley, because Voss will know that Harry will do anything to keep you safe, and that's the lever he'll use. Hermione looked at Harry. Is that true? Yes, Harry said, without hesitation. Hermione, if I'm in there and something happens to you, I can protect myself. I know you can, that's not the point. He looked at her directly. The point is that knowing you're in danger changes how I fight. I become less effective. Not because I'm weak, because I love you and I can't make that not true. He held her gaze. I need you outside. I need you working the countermeasure from a safe distance, and I need to know you're there, and that knowledge will make me better in there, not worse. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were too bright. You've been learning how to argue, she said. Clark's been teaching me to be strategic. I can see that. She looked at the map, then at Clark, then back at Harry. I want a two-way communication set up. Real time. Anything changes, I want to know. Done, Clark said. And I want to be close enough that if everything goes wrong, I can get in within 60 seconds. 200 meters from the western ridge, Clark said. There's a natural shelter formation at the tree line. You'll have line of sight to the approach route, and you'll be outside the effective range of the field generator, based on the test pulse's recorded radius. Hermione looked at the map for a moment. Then she uncapped her pen and started working. 4 days. The days were the most intense Harry had experienced since the war, which was not a thing he'd thought he'd be saying about what amounted to a training camp in the Scottish Highlands with a journalist superhero and his best friend. Clark pushed harder now, not cruelly, but with the specific urgency of someone who'd recalculated the timeline and adjusted accordingly. The sessions ran longer, started earlier, and the complexity of what Clark was asking Harry to do scaled up sharply. On the first day after the news, Clark had Harry sustain the Lumos variant for 3 hours straight, while simultaneously running the circuit and answering questions Clark fired at him from various positions: lateral, overhead, from behind, about spell theory, environmental variables, tactical options in hypothetical scenarios. The intent was divided attention at sustained load, the ability to maintain one magical output while deploying cognitive resource to multiple simultaneous problems. Harry dropped the Lumos twice. The third time he held it for the full 3 hours, dimmer at the end but unbroken, and came back from the circuit to find Clark watching him from the granite shelf with an expression that was several degrees warmer than his usual analytical attention. Good, Clark said. Don't sound so surprised, Harry said, breathing hard. I'm not surprised, he paused. Satisfied. When a thing I expected to happen happens, it's satisfying. A beat. Well done, Harry looked at him. Clark Kent saying well done had a weight to it that was different from other people saying it. Harry had come to realize. It was never encouragement for its own sake. Clark didn't do empty praise. So when the words came, they came with the full weight of meaning them. What's next? Harry said. Altitude, again, higher this time. They'd been doing the altitude sessions every morning since Clark had introduced them on day 3 of training. Clark would take Harry up, not carrying him. Harry rode a conjured broomstick while Clark flew formation to increasing altitudes, and Harry would cast. At 15,000 feet the first time, the cold had hit like a wall and the pressure differential had made his ears ache and his eyes water, and his first 2 spells had come out muffled and imprecise, like trying to shout through a pillow. But by the 3rd session, his magic had adapted. Or rather, and this was what fascinated Hermione when Harry described it, his magic had always been capable of operating at altitude, he simply hadn't known to extend it that way. The stable floor reached up as well as it reached down. Harry pushed it up and it went. 20,000 feet on day 6, and Harry had cast a full-power reducto into open air, and the shockwave had produced a crack like thunder that Clark, flying 50 feet to his left, had felt as a physical pressure. Harry had looked at his own wand with the particular expression of someone recalibrating an assumption, and Clark had said, quietly, into the communication earpiece Hermione had charmed for them, "There it is." On the 4th day, the last day before they went, Clark brought him something. They were on the granite shelf at dusk, the sky doing extraordinary things in shades of copper and violet, the kind of sunset that the Highlands produced occasionally as if to remind you they could. Clark reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small case, matte gray, about the size of a thick book. He held it out. Harry took it. Inside, on a fitted interior, was a set of objects that Harry turned over in his hands one by one. A bracer, forearm length, matte black, lighter than it looked, with a faint geometric pattern on the surface that Harry recognized as related to the markings on the pod. A communication earpiece, much finer than the charmed ones Hermione had made, and a belt with 3 small cylindrical attachments, each one holding a soft blue glow. The bracer is Kryptonian allo-composite, Clark said. My people used similar constructs for field work. It won't stop a killing curse. Nothing I know of stops that, but it will absorb and deflect a significant range of physical impacts and low to mid-level energy discharges. It's also a surface for attaching supplementary Kryptonian tech, if needed, without requiring you to carry it. He paused. I spent 2 nights fabricating it from the pod's secondary housing. Harry looked at the bracer. He turned it over. The cylinders on the belt, Clark continued, contain compressed atmosphere at regulated pressure, altitude kits. If something disrupts your magical ability to compensate for pressure and temperature at elevation, which is unlikely but possible if the adaptive weapon targets that specific function, the cylinders give you a manual fallback. He looked at Harry. Think of it as redundancy. Harry put the bracer on his left forearm. It fitted perfectly. He looked up at Clark. You measured me while I was sleeping, he said. I measured you while you were running, Clark said. Less creepy, marginally. Harry flexed his wrist. The bracer moved with him as if it had always been there, weight distributed precisely, nothing protruding to catch on anything. Thank you. Clark looked at him for a moment. Something passed across his face, not quite an expression, more like the shadow of one, something that had to do with caring about an outcome. Don't thank me. Go in, do what we planned, and come back. In that order, ideally. Harry looked at the valley on the map one more time that night. He had it essentially memorized at this point. Every contour, every approach route, every estimated sight line from the facility's probable position on the valley floor. He went through the plan the way Clark had taught him, forwards first, then backwards from the objective, then from the worst case, looking for the places where the logic broke down. The plan held. He slept. They left Scotland at 4 a.m. on a Thursday, 2.5 weeks after a pod had crashed in a Highland valley and a boy had pulled a man out of it. They arrived in the Carpathians at dawn. The mountains were extraordinary. Not the soft, ancient gray of the Highlands, but something more severe. Ridges like blades, forest running up the slopes in dark masses of pine and beech. The sky above them a deep cold blue with the sun coming up behind the eastern peaks and throwing long shadows across the valleys. The air tasted like altitude and ice and pine resin. It was, Harry thought, a place that had decided a long time ago to be beautiful and dangerous simultaneously and hadn't seen any reason to compromise on either. Hermione settled into her position at the tree line, 200 meters from the western ridge, in the shelter of a natural stone overhang that Clark had identified from the satellite data. She set up her instruments with the focused efficiency of someone who'd packed and repacked for this 3 times and knew where everything was. Two-way is live, she said into the earpiece. Her voice came through clean. Clear on my end, Clark said, 40 meters away, crouched at the base of the ridge. Clear, Harry said. He had his broomstick under one arm, a firebolt retrieved from Grimmauld Place 4 days ago, still the finest production broom made, still responsive as a racing thought. He was wearing the bracer on his left arm. His wand was in his hand. I want to say something, Hermione said, before you go in. Hermione, 2 sentences, Harry. A pause. You've always been extraordinary, but right now you are also prepared, and that combination is, her voice caught slightly. Just come back. 2 sentences, Clark observed. I'm counting come back as a sentence. It's an imperative. It has a subject and a verb. Harry smiled. It was quick, but it was real. I'm going. He mounted the broomstick and went. The approach route was precisely as Clark had mapped it. The western ridge's tree line gave him cover to 50 meters from the crest, and below that angle the valley's bold geometry blocked line of sight from the floor. Harry flew at 30 feet above the treetops, fast and flat, the broomstick tuned to his weight and responding to pressure rather than instruction, the way the best brooms always did. He cleared the ridge crest at speed, dropped immediately below it on the valley side, and leveled off 10 feet above the slope, screaming down through the pine shadows with his body flat against the broom and his wand held back against his thigh. The facility was exactly where Clark had predicted, not dramatic. That was the first thing Harry registered. No towers, no walls, nothing that announced itself. A cluster of low stone buildings that had probably been a farm at some point in the last century, converted and expanded, the additions using stone from the valley itself so that from altitude they'd be nearly invisible. 3 structures plus what looked like a generator housing. Light in 2 windows. one vehicle, some kind of heavy military transport, parked at the north end. And above it all, shimmering, barely visible but unmistakable to someone who knew what they were looking at, the interference field. A dome of it, roughly 200 meters in radius, the kind of visual distortion Harry associated with very powerful magical workings, the air itself slightly wrong inside the boundary. He pulled up at the tree line above the facility and hovered for 3 seconds, reading it. The field boundary was solid but not uniform. The western quadrant, closest to the old stone structure that Hermione had flagged as the probable historical magical site, was stronger. That made sense. The power was drawing from the resonance beneath it. The eastern quadrant, furthest from the source, was thinner. Harry went in from the east. He crossed the field boundary at speed and felt it hit him like a cold wave, not pain, but a profound wrongness, the magical equivalent of walking into a room where the air pressure has changed. His magic compressed briefly, and for a half-second the broom stuttered under him, and then his magic pushed back. The stable floor held. He felt it engaged, deep and solid, and his magic expanded back to full against the interference, and the broom steadied, and he was through. He came down between the two eastern buildings, landed, dismissed the broom with a touch to return it to his pocket-charmed case, and pressed himself into the shadow of the stone wall. 30 seconds inside. No alarm. Good. "I'm in," he said quietly. "Reading the field boundary now," Hermione said. "The eastern quadrant is weaker, as predicted. The magical component is drawing from a ley line confluence 40 meters below the main structure. The power draw is," a pause. "It's enormous, Harry. Whatever they've built under that building, it's been running for a long time." "Clark," Harry said, moving. Clark's voice was the same as it always was, unhurried, present. "Coming in along the river. 30 seconds. Harry moved. He'd memorized the layout from the satellite imagery. Main building on the left, secondary building on the right, which was probably housing for Voss's personnel, the generator housing at the far end. The structure most likely to contain Vassarhelyi was the main building, the lights in the windows, the proximity to the ley line beneath it. He reached the main building's eastern wall, found the window, looked in. A long room. Stone walls, modern equipment sitting incongruously against them, workbenches covered in things Harry recognized as technological, and things he recognized as magical, and things he didn't recognize as either. 3 people visible, 2 in dark tactical gear who were standing with the relaxed posture of people not currently on alert, and 1 person sitting at a workbench who was small, elderly, and working with the focused concentration of someone who had decided that whatever was being asked of them was at least intellectually interesting, which was either admirable resilience or very good compartmentalization. Vassarhelyi. Had to be. No Voss. Harry scanned the room. No 4th figure. "Where's Voss?" he murmured. "Secondary building," Clark said, and he was there suddenly, materializing from the shadow of the tree line at the valley's east edge with the noiseless efficiency that Harry still found faintly startling. He moved to the wall beside Harry in 2 steps. 3 more in there. He's with them, briefing from the sound of it. "He's talking about what comes next," Harry said. "About us," Clark said. "He knows we received the alert. He expected a response." He looked at Harry with steady eyes. "He's prepared for one." "Good," Harry said. Clark looked at him. "I'm tired of people preparing for the wrong version of me," Harry said, and went through the door. He didn't knock it open, didn't blast it, just a quiet alohomora and a push, and he was inside before the 2 guards had processed the fact that something had changed. The first spell hit the right-hand guard before he'd completed his turn, a full-body impediment jinx, the version Hermione had refined for maximum hold duration, that left the man frozen upright like a statue. The second guard was faster, had a weapon up, and Harry was already moving, not away from him but toward and to the left, the shoulder feint engaging by reflex. The guard's eyes tracked the feint's direction. His weapon followed, and the spell went where Harry had always intended it to go, which was directly into the weapon, and the expulso hit it and the weapon disintegrated and the guard caught the concussion of it and went down. 4 seconds. Vassarhelyi was staring at Harry from the workbench with the expression of someone whose brain had moved on to the question of whether this was rescue or a different kind of threat. "Imeric Vassarhelyi," Harry said. The old man blinked. "Yes." "Harry Potter, we're leaving. Are you hurt?" Vassarhelyi looked at the 2 guards. He looked at Harry. He looked at the bracer on Harry's left arm with something that might have been professional interest even in the middle of an extraction scenario. "Not hurt," he said. "I'm in the middle of," he looked at the workbench. "We can talk about what you were working on once we're out," Harry said. "Right now we have approximately 60 seconds before the main building's far door came open, not with a bang." Steadily, controlled, Aldrich Voss walked in the way people walk who have thought about how they walk because the walk is a statement. He was not what Harry had expected, not large and imposing but medium height, line 50s, with a face that was structured and considered, and gave the impression of a person who had never once said anything without intending to. He was wearing dark clothing that wasn't quite military and wasn't quite not. His left hand showed the faint silver gray of augmented subdermal plating from wrist to mid-forearm, visible, unobscured. He didn't hide what he was. 3 of his soldiers came in behind him. He looked at Harry, then at the 2 incapacitated guards, then at Harry again. "Mr. Potter," he said. His voice was even and unhurried, accented faintly, Flemish origin, Harry thought. "You're faster than the projections suggested." "They usually are," Harry said. Voss looked at the bracer. A brief, considering pause. "Kryptonian composite. Kent's work." He looked up. "Is he outside, working on your equipment?" Harry said. Voss's expression didn't change, but his eyes did, fractionally. He looked at Harry with the full attention of a person rapidly revising a plan while keeping the revision invisible. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't anticipate this response," he said. "I want to be honest with you. The raid on the settlement was designed to bring you here, you and Kent." "I know," Harry said, "and you came anyway. You had a person," Harry said. "What were we supposed to do? Make the strategic choice instead of the emotional one," Voss said, and then very precisely, "which is what I've spent 30 years doing and which I understand you've recently been learning." Harry looked at him, held the eye contact and let the words sit without reacting to them. "You know about the training," Harry said. "I've known about Kent's presence in Scotland since 2 days after the crash. I built the device that brought him down. I have monitoring attached to his expected response patterns." He spread his hands slowly, showing nothing in them. "I'm not your enemy, Mr. Potter. I know that's exactly what an enemy would say, but hear me out. While your 3 soldiers are standing 6 feet from me," Harry said. Voss looked at his soldiers and made a small gesture, and they moved back and put their weapons down. Harry's wand tracked the movement and then settled. "Enhanced individuals," Voss said, "have in the last decade begun to multiply in number and capability in ways that existing social and political structures are not equipped to manage. You know this. 3 years ago, an incident in Central Asia involving 2 metahumans and a populated area resulted in 47 civilian deaths. 14 months ago, a rogue magical practitioner in the American Midwest caused structural damage across 6 city blocks. Last year, a single enhanced soldier went off script during a conflict in North Africa, and he stopped. You don't need the full list. You've read it, or you would have if you've been paying attention." "I've been paying attention," Harry said. "Then you know the trajectory, and you know that the existing framework, the Justice League's approach, the International Confederation's approach, is fundamentally reactive. They respond to incidents. They don't prevent them." He looked at Harry steadily. "My device prevents them. A world where enhanced individuals operate knowing that a global deterrent exists is a world where enhanced individuals make different choices. By threatening to remove their ability to act," Harry said. "By establishing a framework of accountability," Voss said. "The same framework that prevents nuclear powers from deploying weapons isn't called oppression. It's called mutually assured deterrence." "Nuclear weapons aren't people," Harry said. But they're a useful analogy for." "An analogy is not an argument," Harry said, and Voss stopped, and something moved in his expression, surprise briefly. "You've built something that can selectively remove the abilities of specific individuals based on a threat assessment you control, with no oversight, no due process, and no appeal. You've appointed yourself the authority on who gets to be what they are." Harry's voice was level, not angry, just clear. "That's not accountability. That's just power with better justification." Voss looked at him. His jaw worked slightly, the only thing that betrayed that Harry had landed somewhere real. "You're more articulate than the file suggested," Voss said. "The file's out of date." The far wall shook. Not collapsed, not even close to collapsed, but a deep structural shudder ran through the stone, dust falling from the ceiling in small columns, and every light in the facility stuttered. The 2 guards Harry had incapacitated slid a few inches across the floor. "That would be Clark finding your generator," Harry said. Voss turned and snapped something to his 3 soldiers in rapid French, and they moved, and Harry let them go because they were running away from him and toward Clark, which was the most interesting possible choice they could have made, and was going to give Clark something to do that he would handle without any difficulty whatsoever. Voss turned back to Harry. His controlled expression had acquired a fine crack in it. "Walk away from this, Mr. Potter," he said. "You and Kent. Vassarhelli comes with me. In 3 months this device is complete and the world becomes measurably safer for everyone in it who isn't enhanced, which is the overwhelming majority of." "No," Harry said. "Just the word. Clean, flat, final." Voss reached for something at his belt, and Harry's wand was up before the hand completed the movement, and the Expelliarmus hit what Voss had been reaching for, and it spun away and clattered against the far wall, and Harry crossed the distance in 4 strides and had the wand at Voss's throat before the man could recalibrate. They were 6 inches apart. Voss looked at Harry. This close, Harry could see the augmentation more clearly, not just the forearm plating but the faint silver trace at his temples, the jaw, the kind of work that had been done in layers over years. And underneath it, just a man who had looked at the world and arrived at a conclusion and built a life around making that conclusion real. Harry could see this close that Voss was afraid, not of the wand, or not only of the wand, afraid of being wrong. "You're taking him home," Harry said quietly. "And you're going to tell your people to stand down, and then you're going to think very carefully about what comes next, because the person who wants a framework of accountability for enhanced individuals has a point that deserves to be taken seriously, and I will take it seriously." He held Voss's gaze. "But not like this, not with a weapon you built in secret from 30 years of stolen death, not with kidnapping, and not on your terms alone. A beat. Do you understand me?" Voss stared at him for a long moment. Outside there was a sound that was the 3 soldiers discovering what it felt like to charge Superman, which could be described generously as brisk and unambiguously as very brief. "Stand down," Voss said quietly. The remaining tension in the room changed quality. Harry stepped back. He kept his wand up. "Vassar Helly," he said, without looking away from Voss. "Come with me." The old wizard slid off his stool and moved toward Harry with the slightly dazed expression of a man who'd spent 30 years being told his research was too dangerous, and was now watching a teenager hold a wand to Superman's colleague's throat, which was probably not the context he'd imagined for his vindication. "Your work," Harry said to him as they moved toward the door, "the parallel system architecture, is any of it usable responsibly?" Vassar Helly blinked. "Theoretically, yes. It was never the concept that was dangerous. It was the application and oversight," Harry said. "Exactly. Good, we'll talk." He looked back at Voss. "We're taking him. The facility stays, the equipment stays, nothing gets destroyed. Because you're going to want to have a conversation about accountability that goes somewhere real." He held Voss's gaze. "And so am I." He went out the door into the cold Carpathian morning. Clark was standing in the open space between the buildings. 3 soldiers were seated on the ground some distance away looking collectively winded, and Clark was watching Harry come out with Vassar Helly, and his expression was doing the not-quite-smile thing. "How did it go?" Clark said. "He has a point," Harry said. Clark looked at him. "I know. That doesn't make him right. I know that too." He looked at the facility, and at the shimmer of the interference field still visible above them, and at the old wizard walking carefully over the uneven ground, and at Harry. "Hermione's going to want to debrief this for approximately 6 hours. 8, Harry said. "She looked at that frequency data and she's been working on something she hasn't told us yet." "She told me," Clark said, "yesterday morning while you were running." Harry stared at him. "What did she later?" He glanced at the facility. "The field generator's primary coupling is destroyed. The field will decay over the next 40 minutes. After that, magical travel is functional again in this area." He looked at Vassar Helly. "We should use the window." The old man had turned and was looking at the facility behind him with an expression that was complicated and private and had years of history in it that Harry couldn't read. "Do you want to go back?" Harry asked him, quietly. Vassar Helly turned. He had a careful face, thoughtful, the face of someone who'd spent a lifetime inside large ideas. "No," he said. "I want to finish the work the right way." He looked at Harry with clear eyes. "I think you might be the right kind of person to make that possible." Harry thought about the question Clark had asked him 3 days ago. "Who are you when no one's pointing at you?" He didn't have the full answer yet, but he had a direction. "Let's go," he said. The interference field shimmered above them and began slowly to come apart, and the cold Carpathian morning opened up, and 3 people who'd just changed the shape of something walked toward the tree line where Hermione was already moving to meet them, arms full of notebooks, already talking. Chapter 5. The last signal 3 days after the Carpathians, Clark disappeared. Not dramatically. No explosion, no fight, no final transmission. He was simply there at midnight. Harry had heard him moving in the cottage, the careful quiet of someone who moved through spaces without touching things unnecessarily. And then at 4 in the morning, Harry woke to absolute stillness and knew, the way you know things when you've been paying close attention to a person for nearly 3 weeks, that the stillness was wrong. He checked the main room. Empty. The nav core was on the table. The topographic maps were there. Clark's Kryptonian physics volumes were stacked neatly by the wall. Everything was present except Clark. Harry stood in the middle of the room for 30 seconds and listened to the silence. Then he woke Hermione. She came out already alert, which meant she'd been half awake already, which meant she'd noticed something too. She looked at the empty room and her eyes moved in the analytical sweep she did when assessing a situation: table, maps, volumes, nav core, window, door. He left voluntarily, she said. Nothing's disturbed. He'd have said something, Harry said. We go in 4 days, he wouldn't just… There. Hermione crossed to the table and touched the nav core. It was warm. Much warmer than it had been, and faintly, very faintly, a blue light was pulsing in it at a rhythm that hadn't been there before. He activated it remotely before he left. He's been running a signal through it. She picked it up carefully. This isn't navigation data. It's a communication frequency. He left it here on purpose. As a breadcrumb, Harry said. As a message or a location marker. She turned it over. I need an hour to decode the carrier wave. 30 minutes, Harry said. She looked at him. He's been gone at least 4 hours, Harry said. 30 minutes. She worked in 22. What the core was broadcasting wasn't coordinates in any conventional sense. It was a Kryptonian positional encoding that Hermione unraveled using the mathematical framework from the nav record she'd studied after the crash, cross-referencing the frequency pattern against the topographic data from Clark's mountain analysis sessions. Harry watched her work and understood maybe 40% of it, and focused the remaining 60% of his attention on not pacing, which he managed by standing very still in the corner and breathing. Vassar Helly, sleeping in the downstairs room of the larger cottage they'd moved to 2 days ago, appeared in the doorway at some point. He was wearing a coat over his pajamas and had the expression of a man who decided that being at the center of an unfolding crisis was his natural habitat. I heard the door, he said. Clark, missing, Harry said. Vassar Helly looked at the core in Hermione's hands and crossed the room with a speed that belied his age. That's a distress encoding, he said. He pointed at a specific pulse pattern. That interval. It's not standard Kryptonian communication, it's a modification. The original code would be continuous. He paused. This has been interrupted and manually restarted at least 3 times. Someone set it running and then couldn't maintain it. Hermione looked at him. He was incapacitated, or he's in a location where the signal is partially blocked and he's having to manually push through the interference. Vassar Helly took the core gently, turned it, held it up to the light. The signal is degrading, not quickly but steadily. The power draw from the manual pulses is depleting the core. How long does it have? Harry said. 6, maybe 7 hours. After that, the core is dark and you lose the signal entirely. Harry looked at Hermione. She was already working on the spatial decoding, her pen moving in rapid, precise strokes, referencing maps, running calculations. He watched her face and could see the answer forming in the few seconds before she said it. Eastern Carpathians, she said, a different valley from Voss's facility, approximately 40 miles northeast. She looked up. Harry, I know, he said. He was already moving toward his bag. Voss moved faster than we expected. This isn't just Voss, Hermione said. Her voice had a quality he recognized, the specific tone she used when she'd seen something the others hadn't yet and was working out how to deliver it. The location. This valley, look. She turned the map toward him and pointed. The valley she'd identified was circled, and she'd made annotations in the margins, and one of them was underlined twice. This is the central site, not Voss's facility, the original one, the oldest resonance concentration in the entire region. She met Harry's eyes. If Voss has been drawing power from subsidiary sites for decades, this is the main reservoir, the one he never used because tapping it would destabilize the entire network. She paused. If Clark has been taken there, it's not just a prison, Harry said. It's a weapon in itself. The Precontatio Obscura concentration at a site that's been accumulating resonance since at least the 12th century, without disbursement, in a geologically contained valley. She looked at the map. The ambient magical field there would be crushing, not physically, but to someone with no magical resistance, the psychological and neurological effect of sustained exposure to that level of concentrated death energy would be incapacitating, Vassar Helly said quietly. Even for someone with Kryptonian physiology, the magic doesn't interact with the body the way conventional energy does. It goes deeper. He looked at Harry. If he's been there for 4 hours already. Harry said, can you build something that would help him withstand it? While we travel, Vassar Helly looked at the workbench. He looked at the components he'd been working with for the past 3 days, building, at Harry's invitation, the early architecture of the legitimate parallel system he'd spent 30 years being prevented from completing. His eyes went to the nav core. I need 40 minutes, he said, and sat down. Hermione touched Harry's arm. She drew him 2 steps away, out of Vassar Helly's immediate earshot. Voss set this up, she said quietly. This is exactly what Clark warned you about. Emotional response, rushed movement, compromised planning. I know, Harry said. You're going anyway. Yes, that's not irrational, she said, which surprised him. Clark told me something, those mornings he talked to me while you were running. She looked at her hands for a moment. He said the thing about you that's not a weakness dressed up as a strength. The thing that's genuinely, structurally a strength is that you understand the difference between recklessness and necessity, that you've made that call correctly every time it mattered. She met his eyes. He said he trusts your judgment. Harry was quiet. He left the breadcrumb, Hermione said. He chose to leave you a signal rather than go dark completely, which means he made a decision. He decided that you coming to find him was part of what he wanted to happen. She held Harry's gaze. He trusts you to do this right. Harry thought about that. He thought about everything Clark had taught him about reactive versus strategic, about the worst case, about building plans that could survive the variables. He thought about Clark sitting across a table and saying you fight reactively. You respond to threats instead of shaping the situation before the threat arrives. I need to know the site, he said. Everything you have on the valley, the resonance topography, the structural layout if there is one, the precontatio obscura concentration pattern. I need to understand the ground before I touch it. Sit down, Hermione said and produced the notebook. She talked for 30 minutes while Vasarhelyi built. Harry listened with the complete, still attention Clark had developed in him. No interruptions, no performance of listening, just actual absorption. He asked 4 questions. Every one of them was precise and built on the previous, and when Hermione answered the 4th one he went quiet, and she could see him placing the information in the mental architecture, building the shape of the place before he entered it. The resonance will affect you too, she said. Not the same way as Clark, your magical resistance means it can't crush you the way it would a non-magical person, but it'll push at you. Dark resonance at that concentration doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy. It looks for grief, guilt, fear, the things it's made of, and it amplifies them. I know what it feels like, Harry said. Dementors. Worse than Dementors. Dementors draw on that resonance as a food source. This is the source itself. She looked at him. Your Patronus will work, he said. She looked at him. Hermione, my Patronus sustained for 40 seconds while running at altitude. He met her eyes. I know what I'm carrying. It'll work, she breathed out. Don't let the resonance touch the floor, she said. That's the critical thing. It'll try to get underneath the Patronus, underneath the stable floor Clark built. It's old and it's patient and it knows how to wait for an opening. Don't give it one. Understood. He looked at Vasarhelyi. How are we doing? The old man held up a small device, crystalline, roughly the size and shape of a large marble, glowing faintly amber. Resonance displacement concentrator, he said. It won't neutralize the precontatio obscura, but it will create a sphere of reduced concentration around whoever holds it, about a 2-meter radius. He looked at it critically. The materials are not ideal. I'd give it 90 minutes of effective operation before the crystal matrix saturates. 90 minutes is enough, Harry said. He took the device and looked at it. For Clark, hold it near him. The displacement effect will clear enough of the ambient resonance that his cognition should restore within minutes. Vasarhelyi met Harry's eyes. There may be some resistance. If he's been under sustained exposure, his responses may not be fully his own when you reach him. Don't be alarmed. It will pass when the resonance clears. Harry pocketed the device carefully. He looked at his wand, turned it once, put it in his holster. He checked the bracer. He thought through the valley, the topography, the entrance points, the resonance concentration pattern Hermione had mapped, the likely location of any facility Voss had built around the central site. You're not coming in, he said to Hermione. I know, she said, and then, but I'll be close, closer than last time. 150 meters, Harry said. Not closer. 100, she said. He looked at her for a moment. 125. And you have the secondary displacement, crystal, Vasarhelyi made. Already in my pocket, she said, which meant she'd taken it from the workbench 20 minutes ago without saying anything, which was so essentially Hermione that Harry almost smiled. Let's go, he said. They portkeyed to the closest safe drop point, which was a ridgeline 5 miles from the target valley, and the last stretch they covered on foot through terrain that was everything the Carpathians had to offer. Dense pine forest on steep slopes, loose shale under the snow line, ravines that required either magical assistance or a very specific relationship with gravity. Harry moved fast and Hermione kept up, and Vasarhelyi had stayed at the cottage to monitor the course signal and feed them updates through the communication earpiece Hermione had modified to function at this range. Signal's stable, Vasarhelyi said in Harry's ear. Still pulsing. He's maintaining it. Barely, but he's maintaining it. Stubborn, Harry said quietly. Consistent, Hermione said from 3 steps behind him. They reached the ridgeline above the valley at dawn, and Harry stopped and looked down. The valley was different from the one that had housed Voss's facility. That one had been contained and functional, a workmanlike repurposing of existing infrastructure. This one was older in a way that was visible even from a distance, not architecturally, but atmospherically. The trees were older, darker, the kind of old-growth pine that absorbs light instead of reflecting it. The valley floor was partially obscured by a low mist that wasn't weather. Harry understood immediately. It was the precontatio obscura, dense enough at ground level to be faintly visible, manifesting as a cold gray-white that clung to the tree roots and the hollows in the ground. At the valley's center, a structure, not large, stone, old stone, built into the hillside rather than on top of it, more excavated than constructed. A building that was mostly underground, its above-ground portion the unremarkable peak of something much larger beneath. 2 access points visible from this angle. And around the perimeter, at intervals, Voss's people. Harry counted 6 in the dark tactical gear he recognized from the first facility. And above the structure, barely visible against the dawn sky, something that was not mist and not natural light. A shimmer, more intense than the interference field he'd crossed in the Carpathian Valley. This one had depth to it, layers, the visual signature of decades of accumulated power. There, Harry said quietly. I see it, Hermione said. She was beside him, her instrument in hand. The needles were moving constantly, all 4 of them in rapid, agitated patterns. The resonance concentration is, she stopped. Harry, it's significantly higher than my models predicted. The valley is essentially a containment vessel. The geological structure, the bowl shape, the specific rock composition has been trapping resonance for centuries. Voss didn't build this, he found it. And now he's using it as a cage, Harry said. The strongest cage in Europe for someone who can't interact with magic, she said quietly. Clark has no magical resistance. None. He walked into this and it hit him like, I don't even have an analogy. It would be like dropping a human being in the middle of the deepest ocean with no equipment. Harry looked at the valley for another 10 seconds. He placed Voss's sentries in his mind, estimated their patrol patterns from the movement he could see, 2 at the entrance points, 4 patrolling the perimeter, spacing between them, timing of the sweeps. He thought about what Clark had taught him, shaped the situation before the threat arrives. I'm going in from the north side, he said. The mist is densest there, but the sentry spacing is widest, 12 seconds between sweeps. I cross during the gap, reach the north entrance, go down. He looked at Hermione. In 40 seconds, I need a distraction at the south access point. Not aggressive, something that draws eyes without creating a response. I don't want them on full alert before I'm inside. Hermione was already thinking. A light source in the tree line, something that could be equipment malfunction. I'll use a delayed trigger Lumos variant, low spectrum, in the pine stand at the south ridge. She looked at him. You'll have the 40 seconds. Yes. She started moving south along the ridgeline. Then she stopped and turned back. Harry, she said. He looked at her. When you get to him, he might not know you, right away. Her voice was steady and full of something carefully controlled. The resonance does that, makes people distant, be patient with it. I know how to bring someone back from somewhere dark, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said quietly. You do. And then she was gone, moving through the trees with the practiced silence of someone who'd learned to move quietly through dangerous places and hadn't unlearned it just because the war was over. Harry watched the valley for another 2 minutes, timing the sentries, feeling the weight of the resonance even from this elevation, a low pressure in his chest, not pain but presence, something old and accumulated pressing against the edges of his awareness. He found the stable floor. He found the second gear. He breathed. Then he went down. The mist hit him at the tree line, and it was exactly what Hermione had described, not physical cold, but something that bypassed the physical and went straight to the places inside that already knew darkness. He felt it touch the grief for Fred and Reach, felt it find Sirius and Reach, felt it find the memory of the forest and the resurrection stone, and the moment of knowing he was going to die and reach further and harder, the stable floor held. His patronus didn't erupt, he didn't cast it yet, didn't want the light giving him away, but it was right there, charged, ready, pressing against the resonance's advance like a hand on a door. He walked through the mist with it held inward, the way you hold a torch against your chest in a dark room rather than raising it overhead, warming yourself rather than lighting the world. He counted to the gap in the sentry's sweep, 12 seconds. He moved in 8 and was at the north entrance before the patrol came back around. The entrance was a door set into the hillside, stone and metal, modern lock on old stone. The resonance here was stronger. It came up from below, from the excavated levels, and it pressed against him steadily. He held the floor. He unlocked the door, not magic, the physical lock, with a manipulation he'd learned from a Muggle lockpicking instruction he'd found in a book at Grimmauld Place when he was 15 and bored, and went down. The interior was lit. Not well, a series of low-utility lights along a corridor that went deeper into the hillside, sloping down, the ceiling getting lower. The walls were the original stone of the valley, not reinforced, not finished. Whatever Voss had built here he'd built minimally. The structure was the valley itself, modified as little as possible. Preserve the resonance integrity, Harry understood. Modify it and you change the field. He moved through the corridor. The resonance was crushing down here, genuinely crushing, pushing from all sides, and Harry kept the floor and kept moving and didn't let it find a gap. He thought about Fred laughing. He thought about the way the stag felt when it came out of the wand, that surge of clean, warm light. He held onto those. 2 doors. The first was open, a monitoring room, equipment, no people. The second was closed, and the resonance was pouring through the gap at the bottom of it like smoke. Harry opened it. The room was roughly circular, the stone walls running down into a floor that was bare earth, dark and dense, and in the earth the faint silver-blue trace of the ley line was visible as a luminescent web, veins of concentrated resonance running through the floor and climbing the walls and pooling in the center. The room was cold in the way places, with no warmth have ever been or cold. Clark was in the center of it. He was seated on the floor, not fallen, seated, which meant he'd chosen it, with his back against a metal frame that had clearly been designed as a restraint, but which he'd partially broken free of at some point, the arm brackets bent outward. He was still held by the leg restraints, which had some kind of energy field running through them, not magical, technological, the blue-white of Kryptonian frequency disruption. Voss had done his homework. The restraints were calibrated to his specific physiology. His head was down. Not unconscious, Harry could see the tension in his shoulders, the active effort of someone in the middle of sustained resistance. His hands were flat on the ground at his sides, fingers spread, pressing into the earth, which Harry realized after a moment was him trying to ground himself, trying to find something solid to hold on to. Harry crossed the room in 7 strides. He crouched in front of Clark and produced the resonance displacement crystal. He held it between them. The amber glow expanded. Warmth, not temperature, something below temperature, pushed outward, and the gray-white of the precontatio obscura in the immediate air shifted, thinned, retreated. The ley line traces in the floor dimmed fractionally. Clark's shoulders dropped. His head came up. His eyes were, Harry had thought about what Hermione had said, he might not know you, and had prepared for it. But the eyes that met his were Clark's eyes, the autumn sky blue, and they focused on Harry with the same speed they always did, 0 to completely present. But there was something under it. Something that the resonance had been pressing on that hadn't fully cleared yet, a depth of darkness under the surface that was not Clark's normal quality of stillness. Harry, Clark said. His voice was rough. Yeah, Harry said, I've got you. Clark looked at the crystal. He looked at Harry's face. He seemed to be conducting an internal assessment, checking systems, the way he sometimes did after physical challenge. How long have I been here? About 5 hours. He was quiet for a moment. His jaw tightened slightly. It was an ambush. 2 of Voss's people were watching the road from the cottage. Heard them before they reached it. I went out to intercept, to keep them away from you and Hermione. They led me here. A pause. I knew I was being led. I followed anyway because the alternative was letting them go back with information about our location. He looked at Harry. That was reactive, Harry said. Clark looked at him for a moment. Then reactive. You came out fine, Harry said. I'm here. You shouldn't have had to. Clark. Harry held his gaze. I'm here. That's what we do. The resonance pushed at the edge of the crystal's radius, and Harry felt it bump against his Patronus-ready state and turned it back. The room held its dark, the ley line traces pulsing slow and old in the floor. The restraints, Harry said, frequency-matched suppression field, specifically calibrated to my physiology. Clark looked at them. The resonance had been affecting his ability to think clearly, Harry understood. 4 hours of sustained psychological pressure degrading the precision of his analysis. The crystal's clearing effect was visibly improving his cognition in real time. The field generator is the locking mechanism in the frame itself. It's a closed circuit. Disrupting the circuit mechanically breaks the field. Mechanically how? Harry said. The coupling point is at the lateral joint of the frame. If that joint fails, Harry looked at the frame. He looked at the joint. He put his wand against the coupling point and said, hold still and cast, not an explosion. A precise, narrow, severing charm, the one Bill Weasley had used on curse-sealed materials, controlled, targeted, more surgical than aggressive. It hit the coupling and the joint cracked and the field flickered and Clark pulled his legs free in one smooth motion and the restraints fell away. Clark stood. It was the same single-second movement Harry had watched in the crater, from down to fully upright, the immediate physical confidence of someone whose body had never been a limitation. Except this time he swayed fractionally and caught himself. "Easy," Harry said. "I'm fine. You've been under sustained dark magic exposure for 5 hours. Give it 30 seconds. Clark looked at him with an expression that had something in it Harry didn't usually see there. Something slightly raw, slightly unguarded, the thing underneath the control that the resonance had been eroding and that hadn't fully rebuilt its walls yet. "How did you find me?" Clark said. "You left the core broadcasting." Vassarhelli and Hermione decoded it. Harry looked at him. "You knew I'd come. I knew you had the capability and the information to follow the signal," Clark said. "I didn't want to assume." "You left a breadcrumb," Harry said. "You trusted me." Clark was quiet. "Don't be weird about it," Harry said. Something moved on Clark's face. "I'm not being weird about it. You're doing the thing where you process an emotion as if it's a structural analysis." Harry stood. "Let's go." They were halfway down the corridor when they heard boots above them. Not one set, several. Voss's people had found the door. Harry and Clark looked at each other. "How many?" Harry said. Clark tilted his head the ear. 4, armed, moving quickly. A beat. "Voss isn't with them. He's at the south entrance," Harry said. Hermione's distraction had drawn him there, which meant he was outside, not inside. "We go up and out, north entrance, fast." "The resonance, I've got it," Harry said. "Stay close." He went first. The 4 soldiers came down the corridor and met Harry Potter coming up it, and the first one raised a weapon and Harry's stunning spell hit him before the weapon was level. Clean and direct, no shoulder tell, no feint, just the spell going exactly where it needed to go at the speed that 3 weeks of concentrated training had built into him. The second one was faster. He fired not a conventional weapon, something energy-based, a sharp crack of directed force, and Harry was already moving, the dodge fluid and low. The spell deflected off the corridor wall by an instinctive shield charm that Harry had cast before he'd consciously decided to. The return stunner caught the second soldier in the chest. The third and fourth had the good sense, or the bad luck, to be standing at the base of the stairs where Clark was. Clark, who was no longer under sustained dark magic exposure. Clark, who had been sitting in a stone room for 5 hours with his abilities suppressed by a resonance field and a frequency-matched restraint, and was now, quite thoroughly, none of those things. The third and fourth soldiers had approximately 1 second to process this information before it became irrelevant. Harry stepped over them and went up the stairs. The north entrance door opened onto the valley floor and the mist and the dark pines and the cold dawn air, and Harry came through it with his wand up and Clark a step behind him, and standing 15 feet away, with 2 soldiers at his flanks and an expression of absolute controlled composure, was Aldrich Voss. He looked at them both. He looked at Harry's wand. He looked at Clark, standing clear-eyed, fully present. "You're more resourceful than I modeled," he said. "Thank you," Harry said. Voss's jaw tightened fractionally. "This doesn't end here. The network of sites, the power infrastructure, the weapon architecture, it exists in multiple locations. You've disrupted one component." "I know," Harry said. "We're not here to dismantle it tonight." He met Voss's eyes. "We're here to get our person back, which we've done." He held Voss's gaze steadily. "And we're here to tell you, one more time, that the conversation you actually want to have is available to you. The framework question, the accountability question. Those are real questions and they deserve real answers." He paused. "But if you use that weapon, or any component of it, on any person or community before that conversation happens, we will find every site in your network and we will shut it down. All of it." He let that sit. "You can't," Voss said. "The network is too distributed, too. I can hear every site in this network from here," Clark said. His voice was clear and unhurried, and had the specific quality it got when he was saying something simply true. "The resonance pattern at each site has a distinct frequency. I've been listening to them for the past 4 hours. I have all of them." He looked at Voss. "Don't test it." Voss went very still. Harry watched the calculation happen in Voss's face, the rapid, invisible processing of a man who planned 10 moves ahead, discovering that someone had been counting while he thought no one could hear. The composure didn't break, but it changed. The certainty in it became something more provisional. "Stand down," Voss said to his soldiers. Very quiet, they stood down. Harry watched Voss for another moment. He thought about what he'd said in the first facility, a man who arrived at a conclusion and built a life around making it real. He thought about what it cost to rebuild a conclusion after 30 years. "Aldrich," Harry said, "not Mr. Voss, just the name. You're right that it needs to be addressed, the accountability question. You're right that it's real and it's urgent and the existing frameworks aren't adequate." He kept his voice even. But you can't be the only one in the room when it happens. That's not accountability, that's just you. A beat. Come to the table, bring your evidence, bring your data, bring Vasarhelyi's architecture framework, make the case properly. He met Voss's eyes. I'll be there, Clark will be there. We'll bring people you haven't thought to bring. A pause, but the weapon stays offline. Voss looked at him for a long moment. If I agree to this conversation, he said slowly, and the outcome is inadequate if the response is political management instead of genuine structural change, then we fight about it, Harry said. Legitimately, loudly, in the open in front of everyone. His voice was steady. That's how it works. That's the difference between what you're doing and what I'm proposing. The valley held its breath. The mist drifted between the dark pines. The ley line beneath them pulsed, slow and old and indifferent to the argument happening above it. I'll consider it, Voss said. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't dismissal. Coming from a man who'd spent 30 years operating in certainties, it was significant. Harry lowered his wand. He didn't put it away, but he lowered it. They moved back through the valley, Harry and Clark side by side, through the mist and the trees, and the sentries didn't move, and Voss watched them go with the expression of a man filing things carefully away, and Harry didn't look back. They found Hermione at 125 meters from the ridge, as agreed, sitting on a flat rock with her instruments in her lap and her eyes tracking the valley entrance. When she saw them both, she went still for a half-second in the way she went still when something she'd been afraid of turned out not to have happened. Then she said, "You're both whole." "Both whole," Harry confirmed. She looked at Clark. "The resonance exposure, residual," Clark said. "It's clearing." He looked at her with the direct, genuine quality of someone who didn't perform gratitude but meant it. "The displacement crystal. It bought me enough clarity to maintain the signal." "Without it, Vasarhelyi built it," Hermione said, "in 40 minutes with inadequate materials." "Tell him I owe him," Clark said. "Tell him yourself," Harry said. "He's been monitoring the course signal and is going to want a full debrief the moment we portkey back." He looked at Clark. "How are you, honestly?" Clark was quiet for a moment. In the growing light, Harry could see the residual of what 5 hours of concentrated dark magic exposure looked like on a person, something in the set of the jaw, a flatness under the eyes that wasn't his, not broken, but marked. "I kept hearing things," Clark said. "The resonance, it wasn't," he paused. "It picks up old voices, things it's collected over centuries, not intelligible, just suffering turned into frequency." He looked at the valley one more time. "It has a lot of collected material." "Europe usually does," Hermione said quietly. They stood there for a moment, the three of them looking at the valley. "He'll come to the table," Harry said. "Voss, not because he wants to, because he's too smart not to recognize that we've just demonstrated we can find him anywhere and he can't move without us knowing, and the only productive direction from here is the conversation. And if the conversation doesn't go where he needs it to," Clark said, "then we have it again," Harry said, louder. "And again after that." He looked at Clark. "The argument doesn't end in a valley in Romania. It ends when the framework is actually different. That takes longer than a night." Clark looked at him. "What?" Harry said. "Nothing," Clark said, "but it was the not-nothing version. The version that meant something was being filed and held." "Say it," Harry said. Clark looked at the dawn coming over the eastern ridgeline, orange and cold and new. "2 months ago you were sitting on a rock in Scotland with no direction and no answer to the question." "I know," Harry said. "You have a direction," Clark said. Harry thought about Voss and the conversation that needed to happen, and the people in that Transylvanian settlement and Vasarhelyi's suppressed research, and the decades of accumulated wrong that needed to be made less wrong. He thought about the question Clark had asked him, "Who are you when no one's pointing at you?" He didn't have the full answer, but he had enough. "I have a direction," he said. The sun came up over the Carpathians and threw light across the valley, and the mist began slowly to lift. Chapter 6, Man of Magic, Man of Steel. The letter arrived at the cottage on a Friday morning, 3 days after they came back from the second Carpathian Valley, and it was not a letter Harry had expected from the direction it came from. It was written on International Confederation of Wizards letterhead, signed by 5 names Harry recognized, 2 of them senior undersecretary level, 1 a sitting member of the Wisengamot, and 2 whose titles were deliberately obscure in the way that titles become when the person holding them wants to suggest authority without specifying accountability. The letter informed Harry, in the careful language of bureaucracy trying to sound casual, that the Confederation was aware of certain recent activities in the Eastern European magical territories, that these activities had come to the Confederation's attention through monitoring channels Harry needn't concern himself with, and that Harry's involvement, along with certain non-magical associates, was considered an unauthorized operation in a jurisdictionally sensitive region. It concluded by requesting Harry's presence at a meeting in Geneva in 4 days. It did not request Clark's presence. Harry read it twice and put it on the table. Clark read it once, set it down, and said, "They've known about Voss." "Yes," Harry said. "The monitoring channels, they've been watching his operation." Clark looked at the letter. "For how long?" The language about jurisdictionally sensitive suggests long enough that they've had internal conversations about how to classify it. Harry looked at Hermione, who was standing at the window with her arms folded, and an expression that Harry recognized as the one she wore when she was angry, and had decided to be precise about it instead of loud. "Hermione, the Confederation has a subcommittee on non-magical technological interaction," she said. "It's not publicly listed in their organizational structure. I found a reference to it in the restricted archive at the Ministry when I was doing the frequency analysis research." She turned from the window. Voss would have come to their attention the moment his operation began drawing on registered magical sites. The Carpathian Resonance Network includes 3 sites with active Confederation territorial claims. They would have known within a year of his operation beginning. "And they didn't act," Clark said. "They decided it was contained," she said, "or useful, or both." Her voice was even in the way it went, even when the emotion was fully present and fully controlled. "They decided that a non-magical entity developing a framework for enhanced individual accountability was manageable, perhaps even strategically convenient. The Confederation has its own concerns about enhanced individuals, the unregistered practitioners, the people who fall outside the statute of secrecy framework." She looked at Harry. "Voss was doing their thinking for them and taking the operational risk. Until he kidnapped a wizard," Harry said. "Until he kidnapped a wizard, attacked a registered settlement, and pulled Superman out of the sky," Hermione said, at which point the liability calculation changed. Harry looked at the letter again. "Geneva, 4 days. A meeting room with 5 names on a letter, and the careful language of people who wanted to take credit for a conversation. They'd done nothing to enable and redirect a situation they'd chosen to ignore. He'd sat in rooms like that before. The Ministry, the Wisengamot, the endless procedural machinery of institutions protecting themselves from accountability. He'd been 17 the last time someone in a room like that had tried to manage him. He was still 17 now, but he was considerably less inclined to be managed. "I'm going," he said. "I know," Hermione said. "And I'm not going alone," he said. Clark looked at him. "They didn't invite you," Harry said. "Which means they're trying to separate us. Address the magical side through magical channels and let the non-magical side be handled. How? By whom? There's no non-magical body with jurisdiction over Kryptonian hybrid technology deployed against human populations." He held Clark's gaze. "You come to Geneva, not as a guest, not as my associate, as yourself. As Superman," Clark said. "As Clark Kent," Harry said. "Superman is a symbol. Clark Kent is the person who decoded the interference pattern and identified Voss, and extracted an elderly wizard from an illegal detention facility, and spent 5 hours in the worst magical environment in Europe holding onto a signal so I could find him." He looked at Clark steadily. "Clark Kent is the person who should be in that room." Clark was quiet for a moment. "The Confederation won't." "The Confederation," Harry said, "is going to have to revise what they will and won't allow, because the meeting they've called is about a situation they failed to manage, and the people who did manage it are going to walk through that door, and that's going to have to be fine with them." He turned back to the table and began writing a response to the letter. "Vasarhelyi comes too." Hermione looked at the letter Harry was composing, then at Clark. "He means it," she said. "I know he means it," Clark said. He looked at Harry writing, quick, certain strokes, none of the hesitation of someone performing confidence rather than having it. 4 days. 3.5, Harry said without looking up. "I want to get there half a day early." "Why?" "Because Lois Lane is in London." Clark went very still. Harry kept writing. "She filed a story last week on unusual atmospheric events over Scotland. She's been following the satellite anomaly data from your crash. She doesn't have the full picture, but she has more pieces than the Confederation would be comfortable with." He did look up now. "A journalist with documented evidence of what Voss built, published before the Geneva meeting, changes the pressure in the room significantly." Clark was looking at him with the expression Harry had seen 3 weeks ago when the idea of the Lumos variant for solar spectrum had landed, the fractional recalibration of an upward estimate. "You've been thinking about this since we got back," Clark said. "Since the valley," Harry said. "Since Voss said I'll consider it. A man like Voss considers things, and then moves if the consideration points toward moving." The Confederation in a closed meeting room gives him cover to move slowly. Lois Lane publishing what she has removes that cover. He paused. I'd like to talk to her, if you're comfortable with that. Clark was quiet for 3 seconds, which, for a man who could process information at the speed he processed it, was a significant pause. What do you want to tell her? Enough, not everything. Enough to make the story accurate and significant without giving Voss's people a tactical map. He met Clark's eyes. I won't say anything about you without your agreement. Everything about you comes from your own mouth or it doesn't come at all. Clark looked at him for a long moment. She'll want to talk to me, he said. She always does. I know, I'm asking if that's all right. Yes, Clark said. Then, with something that was very nearly a smile, she's going to like you. I figured. Hermione was watching both of them with the expression she'd been wearing increasingly in the last week, something that was satisfaction and worry in approximately equal measure, which was her natural state when the people she loved were doing something she approved of that also terrified her. I'll prepare the analytical brief, she said. Full documentation of the resonance network, the weapon architecture, the palimpsest evidence, and the connection to the registered sites. Everything admissible under Confederation evidentiary standards. She looked at Harry. And I'm coming to Geneva. Obviously you're coming to Geneva, Harry said. Who else is going to make the Confederation look like they haven't read their own regulations? She sat down and opened her notebook and began writing in the focused, rapid way that meant she'd been planning this already, which she had, because she was Hermione. They met Lois Lane in a coffee shop in Southwark on a grey London afternoon, which was the only kind of London afternoon that existed in autumn. She was already there when they arrived, Harry and Clark, Hermione having stayed at the hotel to finish the brief, sitting in the corner with a notebook and a coffee, and the specific quality of attention that Harry associated with people who were very good at their jobs and knew it. She was sharp-featured and direct, and she looked at Harry first, assessed him in about 2 seconds with dark, intelligent eyes, and then looked at Clark, and her expression did something private and complete that lasted half a second and then was a professional face again. Clark, she said. Lois, he said. He sat down. Harry sat across from them both. She looked at Harry again. Harry Potter, she said. The magical communities, what's the phrase, the boy who lived? That's the phrase, Harry said. I've always found it a bit reductive. Most epithets are. She opened her notebook. Clark told me you wanted to talk. He also told me that what you want to talk about is related to the atmospheric anomaly over Scotland that I've been tracking for 2 weeks. She looked between them. So, talk, Harry talked. He was precise and selective and honest, 3 things that don't always go together but which Clark had been drilling into him as a combination because imprecise honesty is dangerous and precise dishonesty is worse, and selective truth requires more careful construction than either. He told her about the crash, the interference device, Voss and his operation, the Carpathian network, the kidnapping of Vasarhelyi, the Geneva meeting. He told her what Voss's device could do at full deployment, and what the Confederation's inaction had enabled, and what the published record of both things would do to the political dynamics of the accountability conversation. He did not tell her the specific location of the resonance sites. He did not tell her the frequency architecture of the weapon. He did not tell her anything that Voss's people could use to anticipate interference. Lois wrote and asked questions, and her questions were excellent, not the questions of someone trying to fill gaps in a story, but the questions of someone testing the structural integrity of what she'd been told, looking for the places where the account might be managing rather than informing. She found 2 places where Harry had been deliberately imprecise and named them without drama, and he answered them more completely because she'd earned it. Clark watched Harry navigate the interview and said very little, which Harry understood as its own kind of statement. When Harry finished, Lois put her pen down and looked at Clark. Your turn. Clark told her about his 5 hours in the valley. He told it factually and briefly and with the same precision Harry had been learning, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You maintained the signal manually for 5 hours. Yes, because you knew he'd come. Clark looked at Harry. Yes, Lois looked at Harry, then at Clark. Then she wrote something in her notebook that she didn't read aloud. The story publishes Monday, she said, before Geneva. I'll need independent corroboration for the Voss identification and the Confederation inaction component. I won't publish those on your account alone. That's not how I work. But I have sources at the UN's Non-Conventional Threats Division who can corroborate the atmospheric anomaly data, and I have a contact in the European Magical Regulatory Body who's been uncomfortable with the Confederation's Eastern European policy for 3 years. She closed her notebook. The story will be accurate, significant, and it will be on record before your meeting, which is what you need. Yes, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. You're 17 years old. Still, he agreed, and you're walking into a room with the International Confederation of Wizards to have a conversation about accountability frameworks for enhanced individuals. With Clark, Harry said. And Hermione, and Vasarhelyi, Clark added. Right, she looked between them. Do you know what you're actually building? Have you said it out loud? Harry looked at Clark. Clark looked at Harry. Not yet, Harry said. You should, Lois said, before the meeting, because the Confederation is going to try to name it for you and you don't want that. Harry thought about that on the train back to the hotel, sitting by the window watching London go by, grey and enormous, and completely indifferent to the fact that somewhere in its afternoon, a wizard and a superhero and a journalist had just made something that hadn't existed before. Hermione had the brief finished when they got back, 73 pages, annotated, cross-referenced, with 3 appendices and a summary section that distilled the essential points into 2 pages for the benefit of people who would not read 73 pages regardless of how important they were. She looked up when they came in with an expression that said she'd finished ahead of schedule and was only mildly proud of it. How was she? Hermione asked. Terrifying, Harry said. Brilliant. Good, Hermione said. That's the right answer. They went to Geneva. The Confederation's European facility was a building that had been around long enough to believe in its own authority, which was the architectural version of old money, not ostentatious, not trying to impress anyone, simply present in the way of things that had decided permanence was a character trait. It sat on a street that looked like any other Geneva street to people who weren't looking for it, which was most people, because the notice-me-not enchantments on the exterior had been maintained and refreshed for 160 years. They arrived half an hour before the meeting was scheduled. Harry, Clark, Hermione, Vasarhelyi. The 4 of them walked in together, which Harry had thought about deliberately, not in a line, not in a formation, just together, the way people walk when they know each other and have been through things. The Confederation's representative at the door, a young witch with a severe fringe and the expression of someone whose job frequently required her to look unsurprised, looked at the 4 of them. Her eyes moved to Clark with the specific quality of someone encountering an unexpected variable. Mr. Kent was not on the invitation, she said. He's with me, Harry said. The meeting was called specifically for. The meeting was called because of a situation that Mr. Kent was centrally involved in managing, Harry said. His exclusion from the meeting discussing that situation would be the kind of thing that looks very strange when written down. He held her gaze pleasantly. Would you like to check with the committee whether they want that written down? She looked at him. She looked at Clark. She looked at Hermione, who was holding 73 pages of annotated evidence with the expression of someone who has read the regulations more recently than anyone else in the building. She looked at Vasarhelyi, who had the calm of a man who'd been vindicated by events and was prepared to wait for the room to catch up. I'll check, she said, and disappeared. She came back in 4 minutes and showed them through. The committee room was what committee rooms always were, a long table, too many chairs, the kind of lighting that made everyone look slightly unhealthy, institutional water in glass jugs. 5 people on one side, the 5 names from the letter. Harry looked at them and placed them accurately. The senior undersecretaries had the worn-in authority of people who'd been navigating institutional politics since before Harry was born, and the Wisengamot member had the bearing of someone who considered himself the most important person in any room he entered. They were not prepared for what they were looking at. Harry knew it from the way their eyes moved. They'd expected a 17-year-old war hero who would be flattered by the invitation, possibly nervous, probably tractable. They'd expected to manage the conversation. They looked at Harry and at the people behind him, and at the documents under Hermione's arm, and at Clark Kent standing in the room they hadn't invited him to, and the calculation visible on their faces was rapid and not entirely comfortable. Mr. Potter, said the Wisengamot member Aldsworth. His name was Cornelius Aldsworth, who'd been on the Wisengamot for 30 years and had voted against Harry's course of action in several wartime emergency sessions. Welcome. His eyes moved to Clark. We weren't expecting. Clark Kent, Clark said, and sat down. He said it the way he said his name to everyone, straightforwardly, without the weight of anything else he was. Not Superman, not the last son of Krypton, just Clark Kent, the person who had done the things Harry had described to Lois Lane. He sat down and looked at the committee with the patient, attentive directness that Harry had been on the receiving end of for 3 weeks, and which he now recognized as one of Clark's most effective tools, the absolute refusal to be intimidated by anything a room could project at him. Harry sat. Hermione sat. Vasarhelyi sat. The room reconfigured itself around them, which was something rooms did when the balance of capability and purpose had shifted, even if the chairs were still in the same positions. "We called this meeting," Aldsworth began, "to discuss the recent activities in the Carpathian territories, which you've been aware of for approximately 12 years, Harry said. Silence. The Precontatio Obscura harvesting from the registered sites in the Confederation's Eastern European territorial jurisdiction began, based on the palimpsest analysis, at least 12 years ago, Hermione said. She set the brief on the table. The resonance drainage from 3 of those sites is measurable and significant, and would have triggered the automated monitoring systems the Confederation operates under the 1987 Territorial Magical Survey Act. She slid the relevant section of the brief to the center of the table. The committee would like to explain, perhaps, at what point this information was evaluated and what the decision process was. Aldsworth looked at the brief. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Harry. Harry said nothing. He'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do in a room was be completely silent while someone else's accounting caught up with them. One of the senior undersecretaries, a small, precise woman named Farrock, who had the face of someone who'd been honest in institutions for long enough that it had cost her, looked at the brief, and then at her colleagues, and then at Harry. The Subcommittee on Non-Magical Technological Interaction conducted a review of the Carpathian anomaly 7 years ago, she said. The assessment at the time was that the operation posed no direct magical threat and was, she stopped. Strategically useful, Harry said. She looked at her hands. There were concerns, she said carefully, about the proliferation of unregistered high-capability magical practitioners. The Confederation has, she paused again. There was a view that an external deterrent framework, even an imperfect one, might do the work you weren't doing yourselves, Harry said, not aggressively, factually. The work of establishing accountability for enhanced individuals that the Confederation has been avoiding having for 30 years because the moment you have it, you're also accountable. The room was very quiet. Clark was looking at the committee with the steady, patient attention of someone who'd heard a lot of institutional self-justification and had learned not to give it more oxygen than it required. He let Harry carry the room, and Harry understood that this was a choice, a specific one, the same kind of deliberate support he'd been offering since Scotland, present but not overshadowing, there but not replacing. Harry took a breath. He thought about Lois Lane saying, "Do you know what you're actually building?" "This is what we're proposing," he said. "Every eye in the room, a joint body. Not the Confederation alone, not the Justice League alone, not any existing institution repurposed for this, because repurposed institutions carry their own interests like ballast." He looked along the table. A new body with 3 functions. First, an accountability framework for high-capability individuals, magical and non-magical enhanced, that is transparent, due process governed, and has actual teeth. Not a self-regulatory body, an independent one with the ability to investigate and act. He paused. Second, a genuine research program for parallel system architecture. Not suppressed, not classified, not managed out of political convenience. Vassar Helly has the foundational work. It should be built on responsibly, openly, with oversight. He nodded toward Vassar Helly, who sat with the expression of a man watching something he'd waited 30 years for begin. Third, an early warning system. The resonance monitoring the Confederation already operates, expanded and integrated with non-magical atmospheric and technological monitoring, with Clark's contribution to the frequency identification framework as a founding technical element. He stopped. He let it sit. "And Voss," Aldsworth said. His voice had changed. The institutional management tone was still there, but underneath it was something more honest. A man who was more complicated than his position had required him to be, and who was perhaps recognizing it. Voss's evidence, the 30 years of data he's accumulated, the incident documentation, the threat assessment models, all of it comes into the body as its foundational evidence base, Harry said. He spent 30 years building the case that this framework was necessary. That work doesn't disappear because his methods were wrong. He met Aldsworth's eyes, and Voss himself gets to be in the room, not in charge of it, in the room. Clark spoke for the first time since he'd sat down. The weapon stays offline while the framework is being built. That's non-negotiable. His voice was level and clear and had the quality of something structural, not a threat, a fact, the way the floor of a building is a fact. Voss agreed to consider the conversation. The conversation requires that, if the framework that comes out of it is genuinely adequate, the weapon becomes redundant. If it isn't adequate, the weapon's existence is the least of the problems we have. Farouk was looking at Clark with an expression Harry recognized, the expression of someone encountering a person who was exactly what they appeared to be, no more and no less, and finding it unexpectedly difficult to manage around. "You've thought about this very carefully," she said. "We've had 3 weeks and a significant amount of motivation," Clark said. "The meeting ran for 4 hours. It was not easy. Institutional bodies do not transform in 4 hours. They resist and negotiate and retreat and probe for the edges of what's possible, and Aldsworth made 3 attempts to suggest that what Harry was proposing was essentially already covered by existing structures. Each attempt more half-hearted than the last, as Hermione dismantled the regulatory basis for the claim with the pleasant precision of someone who had read every relevant document and found every relevant gap and was genuinely happy to go through them one by one for as long as it took. Vasarhelyi spoke for 30 minutes about the parallel system architecture, and the room changed quality when he did, because he spoke with the specific authority of someone who had been right for 30 years, and had the patience of a person who'd waited that long and was no longer interested in understatement. He talked about what the technology could build if it was built right, what it could protect, what it could create, and the 2 junior undersecretaries who hadn't spoken all meeting were both leaning forward by the time he finished. By the end of the 4th hour, they had an outline. Not a framework, an outline, the skeleton of one, the first structural decisions that would require months of architecture to fill in properly. But it existed. It had been agreed to by 5 people with institutional authority and written down by Hermione, who was already planning the formal documentation in her head, and by one senior undersecretary who had asked if she could be on the drafting committee with the expression of someone who'd been waiting for something worth drafting. Lois Lane's story ran the next morning. It was everything she'd described, and more precisely targeted than Harry had quite anticipated. She had 3 independent sources, all named, and the Confederation's inaction section was documented with specificity that made it clear she'd gotten more than Harry had given her from the sources she'd found herself. The story was read by the relevant people in the first 4 hours, and by the broader public in the 12 hours after that, and by the end of the day, it was the conversation. Harry read it at a small cafe in Geneva, sitting across from Clark, and didn't say anything for a moment. "She's extraordinary," Harry said. "Yes," Clark said, "she really is." They were flying home that afternoon, back to Scotland, back to the cottage, which had become in 3 weeks a place Harry felt about the way he felt about Hogwarts before the war had made Hogwarts complicated. A place where the work happened and the work was good. They were at the airport. Muggle travel, Clark's preference, which Harry had adapted to when Clark said, "I have to go back." Harry looked at him. "Metropolis, the League. There are things that need my attention that I've been managing remotely." He said it without apology and without drama, which was the right way to say something that was still. Harry acknowledged this to himself, straightforwardly, without making it strange, something he didn't entirely want to hear. "The framework will take months to build. The meeting with Voss needs to happen. Vasarhelyi's program needs a home." He looked at Harry. "None of that stops." "I know," Harry said. "You're not going back to sitting on a rock," Clark said. He said it as a statement, not a question. "You have Hermione and Vasarhelyi and a half-built accountability framework that needs people who understand both sides of it. You have the conversation with Voss that you've already started." He paused. "You have the question and a direction." "I know," Harry said again. Clark was looking at him with the full, quiet attention he'd brought to everything from the first morning on the moorland. Harry had gotten used to being looked at that way, not scrutinized, not assessed, but genuinely seen. It was a specific thing, and he was aware that not every person in the world gave it. "You're going to be extraordinary," Clark said, "not in the prophecy sense. Not in the chosen sense." He held Harry's gaze. "In the sense that you're going to choose it every day for the rest of your life, and that's a completely different and considerably more difficult thing, and you're already doing it." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about the stable floor. He thought about the second gear. He thought about the feints and the altitude and the 40 seconds, and the corridor in the Carpathian hillside, and the meeting room in Geneva where he'd put a thing on the table that hadn't existed before. He thought about Fred, and about Remus and Tonks, and he thought about what Clark had said weeks ago. They didn't die so you could be hollow. "Thank you," Harry said, and then, because he was Harry and he couldn't entirely help it, "For what it's worth, I think you already knew you were right about coming to Earth." Clark looked at him. "You came here and you learned that people could be better," Harry said. "You've been proving it every day. You needed proof too, not just them. You needed to see it working." He paused. "That's what you got." Clark was quiet for a moment. "Then when did you become perceptive?" "About a week in," Harry said. "When you stopped being a symbol and started being a person who eats an embarrassing amount of breakfast. Clark's not-quite smile became something more than that. An actual smile, full and unguarded, the one that Harry had seen twice in 3 weeks and both times understood was not common currency. They shook hands in the airport. It was not a sufficient gesture for what it was standing in for, and both of them knew it, which is why neither of them mentioned it. "The framework meeting," Clark said. "When it happens, call me." "You'll hear it before I call," Harry said. "I'll hear it," Clark agreed. "Call me anyway." Harry watched him go. Clark Kent, 6'3", dark-haired, walking through an airport like every other person in the world, carrying everything he was in the total absence of any visible sign of it, and doing it on purpose. Harry stood there for a moment. Then he took out his wand, not to cast anything, just to hold it, just to feel the familiar weight of it, and turned it once between his fingers and put it back. He found Hermione at the gate. She was talking to Vassar Helly, notebook open, and the old wizard was drawing something on a blank page, a schematic, by the look of it, early lines of an architecture for something new. Hermione was asking questions in the careful, building way she asked questions when the answers mattered. She looked up when Harry arrived, looked at his face. "He's gone, Metropolis," Harry said. He sat down. "What are you working on?" Vassar Helly turned the page so Harry could see it. "The foundational structure of the parallel system monitoring network," the old man said, "the early warning component of the framework. If we begin with the resonance nodes already established by the Confederation's territorial survey and integrate them with," he looked at Harry. "You don't need the technical detail right now." "I will," Harry said. "Yes," Vassar Helly said. "You will." He went back to drawing. "I'll teach you." Harry looked at the schematic. Lines and nodes and connections. The early anatomy of something that didn't exist yet, built by a man who'd been told for 30 years that his ideas were too dangerous to be real. "Good," Harry said. They boarded. Harry took the window seat and watched London come into view below them as they descended. Enormous, indifferent, full of people carrying things the news never stopped for. He pressed his hand flat against the cold glass and looked at the city and thought, "This is the place. This is what it's for, not a prophecy, not a war. This, the unglamorous, daily, difficult, essential work of making things less wrong." He thought about the symbol on Clark's chest. The thing that had meant one thing in a dead world and become something else in a living one because of the choices made underneath it. He thought about the scar on his forehead, the one that burned in the presence of dark magic, the one that had marked him since before he could speak. He'd spent 17 years thinking of it as a wound. He thought now that it might be something else, not a symbol chosen for him, just a mark. And what a mark meant was exactly what you made it mean, by what you chose to do with the life it sat on. They landed. Harry and Hermione and Vassar Helly walked out of the terminal into the grey London afternoon, and none of the people around them in the arrivals hall paid them any attention, which was fine. Harry preferred it that way, as it turned out. Ron was waiting outside. He was leaning against the barrier with his hands in his pockets and his hair slightly flattened by the wind and an expression of elaborate casualness that meant he'd been worried and had decided to present as relaxed. He looked at Harry and then at Hermione and then at Vassar Helly, who was unfamiliar to him, and then back at Harry. "All right," Ron said. "All right," Harry said. Ron looked at him for a moment. "You look different, do I?" "Yeah." Ron considered this with the serious, uncomplicated attention he applied to things he found genuinely important. "Good different, like you've been somewhere." He paused. "Did something actually happen, or do I need to extract it from Hermione one piece at a time, because she'll do that thing where she puts it in chronological order, and I'll be there for 4 hours. Hermione looked at him. "Chronological order is how things happened." "It is," Ron agreed, "but you start at the foundational context, and I fall asleep before you get to the exciting bits." There were, Harry said, a pod crash, a Kryptonian, 3 weeks of training, 2 facility infiltrations, a kidnapping, a conversation with Superman in a pit of concentrated dark magic, a meeting with the International Confederation of Wizards, Lois Lane, and the beginning of something I don't have a name for yet. He looked at Ron. "In roughly that order." Ron stared at him. "Right," Ron said. "Pub, obviously," Harry said. They walked. Vassar Helly walked with them, and Hermione was already telling Ron the version with foundational context, and Ron was already glazing over slightly with the affectionate endurance of long practice, and the London street received them without ceremony, which was correct. Somewhere above the city, Harry knew, the sky held everything it always held, the accumulated signals of the world, the travel and the work, and the long distances between people who mattered to each other. And further up in the clean cold above the clouds where the air ran out and the stars began, a man who could hear heartbeats from orbit was already in motion, already heading back to his city, already choosing. The choice. That was all it ever was. Harry Potter walked into the warm noise of a London pub with his best friends and an elderly wizard, and the clean, unhallowed sense of a person who had found, not a destiny, but a direction, which was harder to find and infinitely more worth having. He ordered tea. He sat down. He began.